Welcome everybody to the Existentialist Society in Melbourne, Australia. Existentialism is an umbrella term covering diverse and often conflicting schools of thought. Consequently, we are not agreed on who or what is an existentialist. We simply agree to disagree. I'm David Miller, Secretary of the Existentialist Society, and our speaker today is Remco van Santen, and his topic is From Einstein to the Law, Reclaiming the First Person in Science and Life. Remco, all yours. Oh, you're muted.
Okay, right. David, first of all, hi everyone. And in particular, David, I just wanted to open up by saying thank you. Thank you for creating the opportunity for us to share ideas and to contribute, raise questions. I learned from that, and hopefully everybody will also gain from this experience. Now, first of all, I also want to particularly say, why am I doing this topic? Why did I pick these people, these Einstein and Bohr, and then, as you just saw in the rehearsal, picking on a cook? Well, hopefully that will evolve. But, it was something that has been festering with me, and I just need to give you the personal side. Just bear with me for a moment, because I think perhaps some of you might be able to relate to it. And this is my experience, that after many years at university, and doing in particular, what really hit me between the eyes was when I did an economics degree. And I thought at the end of it, it wasn't very hard. I did a mathematics-based thing. I used to be a chemical engineer. Doing economics was just a little sideshow for me. But I thought, what the hell was this about? And then over the years, there was something happening. I did a unit in business finance, for example. And the fellow that was lecturing was an undischarged bankrupt, and he was lecturing me on business finance. A rather painful experience for me was when I had a very close friend say to me, and only close friends can say that, and he looked at me and he said, Rem, when I want to get want to get advice, I go to you, ask for some advice, and do the very opposite. That hurt. That really hurt. But it also was a wake-up call. There were times when, you could look at photographs of me and you could see whether the stock market was up that day. I had association with external events, so I wasn't present. When I was at school reunions, another thing that struck me was how the people that made it, and hey, look, that's a subjective term. The guys that made it at the school reunions were not on the A class. In my time, you had A, B, C, and D, and other sort of groupings. They weren't the guys from the A class. They were perhaps not necessarily the C class, but the B class. They were the sort of average. And I thought, why are these guys so successful? People like me just used their heads and got good, low risk, reasonable employment, but we were not the guys that made it. A TED Talk by Sir Ken Robinson. Now you must go and watch Sir Ken Robinson if you haven't already. He's one of the most popular speakers on TED, and he calls professors as having heads without bodies. It will make sense in a moment if you don't get it. So my first step at having this nagging feeling, I was saying something is wrong. And it's something I couldn't put my fingers on. But then I was reading Ian McGilchrist's books, one of his books called Master and the Emissary. I also read Kahneman's book, Thinking Fast and Slow. I'm dropping names, highly recommended. And you know what those books did? They gave me a neurological basis for seeing the world. And in particular, and I don't want to elevate one over the other. You take your pick. Some people prefer Kahneman. I prefer McGilchrist. And he was talking about the primacy of the left brain and the right brain. And the right brain is holistic. The left brain was focused. And some of you may have attended one of my webinars on that. And that gave me a neurological insight. And I felt I was really, really excited about that. I thought, wow, this is it. But then gradually something else was happening. And I began to see, as I explored, that there was also a message coming from quantum mechanics. And that is why I picked the image of Niels Bohr and Einstein, because whilst these are perhaps people that you don't feel directly connected with, you might say, well, okay, they were dealing with the world of atoms, but I live in the real world. Okay, it's a fair statement. It's a fair statement, but we'll address that. These are pivotal people, and they are pointing to something in their dispute. And remember this, and remember, take this. This is another point that at the foundations, the very foundations of both science and philosophy, both of them, there is a divide, a chasm. There is a split between the analytical school and the, let's say, call them the continental school, which is perhaps includes the postmodernists and the like. There is a split. There is a split in the foundations of quantum mechanics, which is really about the science of interaction with reality. There is a split. And you get very, very confident people in both camps. You get very passionate people in both camps. But note, there is still that divide after all that time. And there is an answer. And I'm going to share that with you. And I hope that you might, well, let's see how the conversation goes. You can put your comments on the side. I'm sorry, I can't multi-track. I'll be focusing on my slides, so I won't read your comments directly. I'm hoping that my wife, who's watching this, will do this for me and grab the comments, because I will try and respond to them. So there is this divide. So I'm sorry, this is a very long preamble, but it's important to get it. So today we've got slides, and I've got two brief videos. Both of the videos are hopefully you'll get the message. And what I'm doing is I'm sharing a structure. Like I talked about McGilchrist, I'm offering just a slightly different structure. And that is will help you perhaps understand not just about science, and it isn't about science. It will help you perhaps, certainly help me, to see what the law is doing, what economics is doing, what politics is doing, and society. And also, just to cover my butt, I want to say this, and before I get going, this is not, and I want to say to shout this is not an attempt to reform. If I sound passionately committed to something, please don't read it as an attack. So, for example, on the system of law, I'm creating an opening into a way of looking at, for example, the law, and you can make your own call. I implicitly have made mine, but this is up to you. And perhaps the law is at its optimal. I don't think so, but that's my view. And finally, and before now we'll start the slides, I want to say this: is it useful? I feel I want to shout and stand on the balcony. Yes, it is extremely valuable. I just found that it's helped me sort of relate to the world, understand people, and to be more reconciled, if you like. It gives me a way of looking at the world, and as I already alluded to at the beginning, it's helped that gnawing disquiet that held for all these decades. And I'm now looking back at myself, and I thought, oh, if only I had that insight that I have today, now in my 70s. Anyhow, that's enough talk. I'm sorry, David, that was a very long rambling, but I felt I had to get this off my chest and to give you a little bit of an insight what the slides are about. So with that, we will try and start, and we will now share. This meeting is, where's the share screen?
Green button at the bottom.
Yeah, it should be there. I did practice it. Why I'm looking at the screen, and perhaps I need to make it bigger. I'll just go to the side. I'm not seeing this meeting is being recorded, but I don't see a share button.
Should be a green button at the bottom of
Oh,
the screen.
yes. I'm sorry. Yeah, thankfully my dear wife is there. And I now have to find, hopefully this will be it. share. You should be seeing something black.
Yes,
And now we are, I should have pulled up where it is now. Slideshow, and here we are. Now,
perfect.
okay. So this is the opening, and oh, hey, I'm pulling a trick on you guys. That is not what I had on the web page. I had a colorful photograph of these two people. Um, so let's correct for it. That it was what the result of AI. They look a bit more real, and forgive me for running an AI over that black and white image. Um, and I'm using that image in preference to that famous picture. Now, that was of Niels Bohr and Einstein in 1923. Now, take note of the year 1923. And they were sitting there in Leiden at the, um, I forgot the name of the scientist. Anyway, it was in 1923. They had a quite a heated debate, but they were still good mates. 2 years after that meeting, they would not talk to each other. There was a split. And at one time, Niels Bohr traveled to Princeton, where Einstein was working, and they were in the same room and they did not make contact. And that was the extent of the split. So that's what I was talking about earlier about that schism in science. These people are manifesting that, representing that, I'm sorry. Okay, I'm saying, and this is the beginning of my presentation now, this is existentialism expressed. And because really this is about an existentialism with a little bit of icing over it. I wanted to do this, next slide. I actually prepared this for a group of teachers and I presented, who I wanted to share what existentialism is. So for a sake of a minute, I thought I'd step on your patch, David, and give you what my view of existentialism is. And I'm just giving you a few indicators that I feel. So the first person is first person engagement. It's about you. It is not about an abstract curriculum. Remember, I'm talking to teachers, but the principle is still relevant to everyday life. So the learners are the agents. They're not passive vessels to be filled with stuff. As an existentialist, the meaning emerges by engagement. And that will have a bit of meaning with that video clip that I'll have at the end. It's not a delivered content. That's what I grew up with, delivered content. But it's gradually changing now. And as I'll show in that video clip with the Finns are a good example of how they do it. It's learning, it's located, it's uncertain, and it's open. It's not predetermined and there aren't specific outcomes. It involves, with the students in particular, but also living. It's having choice, having a sense of risk and responsibility. I think that's increasingly seen as important. And I read with joy how the Germans were introducing risk into the design of playgrounds. And by the way, it's important to say that they involve the students in the design of the playgrounds and they factor in risk. So it's all part of the learning process. Now, I talked about the fault line in philosophy and in science. Some of these terms will sound a bit difficult to comprehend. Just bear with me. If it doesn't hit and resonate with you, don't feel uncomfortable. Just hold it there. I will be repeating a lot of these terms and gradually colouring in. So I'm giving you the black and white. I'm giving you the outline. And the key thing is, and this is the point about these two people, but it applies to other areas, is the observer outside the description or inside it? And in philosophy, you could say, what comes first, the world or the witness? And you'll find that if you think about the discussions about science and other areas, you'll find that you'll see that you're either in one or other camp. That's unfortunate because we really don't need that divide, and there is an answer. I'm brave enough to suggest that there is an answer, but I will say that it is. And to translate that and into the theme of today's conference, webinar, I better call it, is it third person or first person? Now, that's the first hint of what the webinar is about. Is it third person or first person? So what is the third person and first word? So I've got this slide here. Here are two scenes, basically the same. On the left, you'll have a scene as you. you don't see yourself, you just see the scene. It's a rising sun or a setting sun and a tree. But on the right, you see the, oops. Sorry. Okay. And that's the first person view. You have the third person view. Third person means that somebody else is describing and you are there. Now, be clear, I will be repeating it, so in one way or another. And that's important. There's two ways of knowing, but actually only one is lived. That is the first person. But the important point to take out is that we don't live in the third person. Now, here I'm using the word stabilize. Because I'm covering so many different domains, I'm having to compromise, and I'll use the word stabilize, and you'll see why later on. We stabilize the experience. If you like, we can record it, but we stabilize the experience into it, and we do it later, not immediate. Get that? So there are two common ways of knowing, and as I say here, the analytic and the contextual. Again, we come back to this third person, first person. So forgive me. Look, the first half of my presentation is tedious and laborious. Hang in there, please. Don't say, oh, this is too hard. This is too much over for my head at this time. Just stay with me because it gets more interesting. I'll have meaty stuff at the end, and at the very end, I'm hoping, and I hope you've got $1,000 in your pocket because I'm going to make you an offer. Okay, third person is a screen, and that's the record. The first person is the I. I'm using that symbol. I've adopted that symbol in my presentation. The third person is basically analytic. It's about description. In the first, it's contextual awareness, it's lived experience. The third will use names, it will use models, it will use categories. In the first, it's context, relationship, it's presence, it's that feeling. The third, it's stabilized. Again, that word stabilized, if you like, it's a metaphor for having been recorded. It's also simplified. It's important. The first person is time bound. It's a lived world. The third person, it's described. It's not the actual reality. It is a described reality. Again, a lot of words, you'll get the meaning of it. So we're doing a charcoal sketch in this. It's a charcoal sketch that I'm sharing, and it will gradually, hopefully, it will reveal the essence of my presentation this afternoon. And here it's about reality being encountered. And the important point that I'm repeating time and again is the third person description is an abstraction from the first person encounter. So the first person encounter includes the third person. That's the important point. And that's another point. So what are the key points? First person, it's immediate, it participates, it's situated, it's located. The third person, it's descriptive, it's recorded, it's detached, it's shareable. So in this world, there is a question that has to be answered in some way. Why does the third person mode dominate the conversation? If you listen to the philosophical conversation, you listen to any science, it's very, very clear all the time. The third person mode dominates. So why does it? So I've chosen this image. I've chosen this image which shows fuzzy people. It's a busy place. It's hectic. And then you have these little snippets of information that may be symbolic of your phone in your hand. It gives you little insights into the world. So the third person is great because it's simpler, it's scalable. It sounds authoritative because you can sound authoritative because it's simple, it's straightforward. This is also an analytic stance. It offers control amid the flux, the movement. You've got little snippets. And the world is accelerating. And if you can engage these little abstractions, it feels relaxing, stabilizing. So in this massive plethora of information that we're living amongst, the abstraction feels like relief. It's cognitively cheaper. It's easier. And it's also, if I may use the term, louder. It's louder because you can sound convincing. And if you think about that, you think about the leaders of some countries who oversee, some countries where you have some rather loud people with their simple messages. Here are expressions of that. McGilchrist makes that point. And by the way, McGilchrist, who I've referred to and will only refer to once in my slides, is a psychiatrist, and he talks about the domination. He calls it the left brain. And please don't misconstrue about pop psychology, a left and right brain. That's nonsense. It's about a disposition towards the left brain. Read the books and you'll see what I mean. Now, we can recognize that. And this is a diagnostic interpretation, not I can be contested here, but I'm going to do it. I'm going to show this because it's going to, this mushroom will feature a little bit later on, with good reason. And this is a magic mushroom. And it contains psilocybin, and it reduces the detached third-person abstraction. I've never taken it, okay? I've never taken it. It shifts the experience towards immediacy and participation. And what's more, the observer and the observed feel less separate. In other words, you feel more connected with the world. So I'm suggesting this. If a substance can dissolve that detachment of you and that, then I'm suggesting that the stance was never absolute. It is only an adoption. Oh, come on, Rem, you're not serious with that. Hang on, like everything else, please bear with me. This is a charcoal sketch. It's a charcoal sketch only. So bear with me and it will evolve. I like this. There's a few slides in this presentation that some may recognize because I'm sorry, I did present it in an earlier one and it's very important and I'm providing it in a different context. Ceci n'est pas une pipe, from my anglicized French. This is not a pipe. A painting by Magritte. And what did he mean? He was an existentialist, by the way. What did he mean by that? Now, I'm introducing these two people. On the right, let's start with David Bohm. David Bohm was a protege of Einstein, and I have to introduce David Bohm for no other reason than I'm using him to leapfrog into Krishnamurti. Because some of you may think, oh, Krishnamurti, and this speaker is connecting with Eastern mythologies or Eastern thinking. Well, David Bohm, who was a protege of Einstein, absolutely brilliant man, so brilliant that the CIA wouldn't allow him to see his own PhD thesis, and he lost his American citizenship and had to go to Brazil and get a Brazilian passport because he had a bit of a lefty inclination, but he was also brilliant, and what he did was cutting edge. And he had endless conversations with David Bohm and with Krishnamurti, and you can find it on the web. So it's David Bohm here and J.D. Krishnamurti. And you might have heard me say this, but it's very important to get it. Here, J.D. Krishnamurti introduced Eastern thinking to the West, and one of his things, and it's very relevant here, the day you teach a child the name of a bird, that child will never see that bird again. And David Bohm was an ontologist. In other words, he was about things. In a world where people like Niels Bohr was more inclined to the epistemology, that is about the laws, and without having to need the things, the ontology. So here we have a beautiful parrot with lovely feathers and colors and behaviors, and a whole lot of things that you would associate with the seeing. And he's labeled to be a parrot. And with that, you get the record stabilized. It's recorded and it's shareable. Very hard to share all the things I talked about before, but once you stabilize it, that is call of the bird, you can communicate it and everybody knows exactly what you're talking about, but there is a price you pay. And so a living presence becomes an object. So I'm suggesting to you that the labeling is the minimal act of a third person translation. That's what the first thing you do. You label, it's third person. Take it from the first person experience, label it, package it up, and it goes. And then the next thing is some of you may be thinking, well, why is he telling me this? I know that. And some of you may not even agree at that point. Well, let me introduce my own experience. This is a symbol of the various forms of energy. At the top, you have, when I say at the top of you have it's a dam, right? It's a hydro dam. You have water with potential energy, and then the water flows down with kinetic energy. And then it becomes, through the turbine, becomes electrical energy. And then it becomes thermal energy, right? These are all descriptors. Now, I used to be a chemical engineer, and so I lived with that. I never stopped to ask that question. And I thought to myself, Rem, you've never asked yourself this one question. What the hell is energy? And I couldn't answer it. And I thought, this is the trap of labels. Labels enable, look, I'm not diminishing labels. We need them. There's no question about that. But sometimes we don't stop and ask them, what the hell is what's energy? So it's a label. It's not for anything that is encountered as a thing, but inferred from a physical change. A physical change from, let's say, from potential energy, water at the top, to water at the bottom via a turbine, and etc., etc. And ending up with, so it's a bookkeeping term. And that's my point here, my last comment here, is that labels stabilize the world so effectively that we forget they are labels. This is so important to get. I just can't overstate it. Now, I had a discussion with my dear wife last year about what's better for me, an apple or a pear. And the traditional thing to do is we go and use the third person. We look at the composition, we look at the ingredients, we measure the values, general claims. But there's also a first person issue. What is the content? What are my needs? What is the relationship? And that's the difference between first and third person again. As I said, I will be hammering that in the first half. Please bear with me, it is important. But unless you can get that, then the second half won't make a lot of sense. So nutritional value is relational. It's not merely composition or absolute. Another expression is a photograph I took at the Sydney Museum, and it was a memory device that the Pacific Islanders used for navigating. What it does, it trains the navigator. Now, okay, we now have GPS, but in my experience, we also have the sextant. And what is that doing? It trains the measurement. It's the difference. One is training the navigator, one is first person, and the sextant is training the measurement, third person. It's communicable, right? So here we have a first snippet of Ian McGilchrist. He talks about the right brain and the left brain. Participatory, lived, contextual, temporal. The world is experience. It's a description of what the Pacific Islanders must do to get a sense of direction. They use the temperature, they use the wind, they use the wave shapes and the wave interactions to navigate. And the left brain, third person, as the world was described. Sure, look, one is more accurate, all of that, but just get clear what this distinction is. So I'm using some various examples to hammer the point on why I say it's important. Okay, now this is where we're going to do that brief minute video, and hopefully the sound will work. Here is a cook on the left meeting Obama, and the cook is explaining why a recipe is not the same as cooking. Now, I'm hoping that the sound will come over, and we will. Okay, let's try it.
Rules work by ignoring details. What anyone who's very skilled in a domain knows is that being very skilled means responding not just in general terms to the situation, but responding very specifically to what the situation demands. So a chef working in the kitchen can't go by the rules in the cookbook.
Let me tell you about rules in cooking. I had a book written by a woman, and she put the recipes in the book that her housekeeper, or at that time, was the mammy of the house, you know, but she was the lady who ran the house. So naturally, all her friends, when the lady wrote the cookbook somewhere about 1910 or something, they asked her, well, why do you give her all your recipes and all your things? So her answer, and was a good one, she said, you know, cooking is like religion. Rules don't no more make a cook than sermons make a saint. So you can have all the recipes, all the rules you want, and you could take the same things I'm doing here, and maybe you can't do the same things I do.
So the authentic person is the one who will confront this concrete situation, who will do what needs to be done, who's responsive to it, attuned to it, and who therefore has a certain kind of spontaneity that you don't get if you insist on falling back on rules, principles, procedures, generic formulas for how to act and what to think and what to say.
Rules work.
Okay. The point is, and I don't know what it sounds, perhaps before the second and briefer video, I'll have that sound sorted out. I'll ask my wife to just check on the settings in PowerPoint after maybe that's on my side. The point here is that the recipe is accurate. You can communicate it, but it's incomplete. As the cook said, you can know the recipe, but it doesn't make you a cook. And it's the limit, and this is the point. It's the inevitable limit of third-person description. There is a limit because you are decontextualizing what you're communicating as a record. Now, quantum mechanics. There is, some of you may think, well, okay, I live in the real world. I'm not really interested in the world of atoms. But the world of atoms is actually now perceived even with the naked eye. For example, with the Heisenberg uncertainty principle associated with atoms can be perceived with the naked eye. They've done that. So the important message to take about quantum mechanics and why I'm introducing it relates the experimental arrangements to record the recorded outcomes. And you need to know this one. You really, don't blind eye and say, oh, that's not my interest. It's very, very important to get this. And I've shown this before, and bear with me on this one. It's basically an experiment where you can see, where there might be a light source or electron source. And you have, as you can see, two detectors on either side of the slit. I think I can do laser pointer here. Okay, here we are. Now you'll be able to see my pointer. Two slits, right? And over here, there are two detectors. And what you get is what you would expect. You get two parts of the electron on the sensor. And you'd expect that without knowing much about quantum mechanics or the wave theory. Yeah, that's what you would expect. You go and shoot bits of ping pong balls or anything through the slits, you're going to get that sort of pattern on the sensor, right? Okay, fine. Now, sorry, I should have made that clear. Now, what we're going to do is here, and this is the remarkable thing about this experiment, and this is just it's shouting what I've been talking about up till now, is that the moment you put some detectors to see which of the two slits the beam goes through, let's say you're shooting electrons one and after the other, there's a bit of ambiguity about whether it goes through the left-hand one or the right-hand one. Something magic happens, or seems to happen, and I'm going to say that, seems to happen, and the record is factual. You will no longer get the particle expression, but you'll get this. You can see this expression on the, I think we'll get, here we are. We should get this happening. Come on. Okay, I've just changed my pointer, but in the result of that, I'm going to lose it. Okay, I'm sorry. Okay. All right, I've changed the character. Look, we are getting a wave interaction result. So the very fact that you're putting a camera there is changing the outcome. That's rather extraordinary. Now, that's the way to do it. By changing my pointer, I've changed the characteristics of my mouse. But anyway, the outcome is fine. So the question is, what is the detector? What is it doing actually? And there is a lot of discussion about this. So the interaction writes a physical trace. That's the first thing you got to get. So interaction of or perhaps I should have put the system creates a physical trace. That is the record we just discussed. And that trace is stabilized so others can consult it. In other words, you will communicate that record by some means or another. And that means that you're losing a perspective. You're removing the standpoint. That word I'm going to use a little bit later. So the record, that is, let's say it's photographic paper, is the bridge from the first person participation, that is the actual experimenter who set up the system, to a third person description. That is, I'm seeing particles or I'm seeing a wave interaction. And that's what some physicists call the collapse of the wave function. But it belongs to the description, this is the important bit, it belongs to the description of that record. Okay, so this is where the importance, and description can take different guises. Here's a notebook. And the third person descriptions rely on the physical record. It's measurement by the first person. It creates a trace that can be shared. And the descriptions like wave or particle appear only after the record. Not before, after the record. Get it in your, get that point. So these are the third person. So the puzzle is not in the experiment. It arises, that enigma, so-called. The enigma arises when the description is assumed to precede the record. And because that is our natural tendency, we call it an enigma. And many of these enigmas live in the gap between the first and the third person. Again, we're going to get into some real life examples and we'll see that in a few minutes of what I'm talking about. If it sounds abstract, hang in there. So, for example, the wave-particle duality. If anybody knows physics, the de Broglie argument about the wave-particle duality. Entanglement. It's a spooky action at a distance argument by Einstein. And entanglement. The consciousness. Endless debates by people like Chalmers and Dennett about what consciousness is, and free will. Well, I'm going to suggest to you, like I have in this image that you can see there, where you got on the left, let's call it the first person, on the right, that grey area is the third person, and we have to straddle it. We have these terms like wave-particle duality, entanglement, consciousness, and free will. Well, I suggest we have the same gap, but just 4 names. And I'm going to suggest that consciousness is a description of a body. I don't have consciousness, I'm not aware of it. And you might say this is a bit of a slick expression. Well, okay. So I'm suggesting that it's just names for the gap between participation and description. So what objectivity? I'm going to just give a quick, objectivity is a key point for scientists. It's often debated about objectivity. It requires a point of view. Objectivity is not just a map, you also have to know its orientation. And stability requires stable reference points. But there are no absolutes, only shared reference points. That's important. It's always going to be different for every participant. Now, this is a very trite. It seems almost. I feel almost embarrassed to think that this actually happened, but it did. Wald's lesson. Now, Wald was I forgot his first name. He was a Hungarian mathematician. And what happened there was, this has happened during World War II, and aeroplanes were coming back to base, or some did, with bullet holes. And these were of the planes that survived. And of course, what was the initial response to this statistician or statistical analysis by the authorities? They said, oh, no holes. These must be critical areas. Sounds almost naive, doesn't it? But that's what happened. No holes must be critical areas, and we must reinforce those areas. But what Wald did, he reversed the focus. He said, Absence reveals reality. In other words, where you don't see the holes is where we're going to have to reinforce, because these are the planes that are not returning. And the point I want to make here is objectivity requires knowing how the record was produced. So you just can't present this record. You need this how factor. It's that how factor. It's that contextualizing. Here it is, this is of returning planes. In the previous one, it was, the previous slide was about the orientation. There is something missing, always missing, when you abstract the information into the third person. And that is the key message. So objective information is necessary, yes, but it isn't lived experience. So what travels between us is description. It coordinates action, but does not recreate the experience. And that's the important bit to take, and it comes over. And I think this graphic makes it clear. Here in the center, we have a piece of music, and we have the director, the conductors, we have the musicians. They all make their interpretations, and that is what the distinction is. You have the objective information. The records are constraining what can be said, but it's the language games, and I'm introducing the term language game here. If somebody has participated in my Wittgenstein talk, it was coined by the philosopher of language, and he's most influential by repute of the 20th century, and that is Ludwig Wittgenstein. And he makes it very clear and reasons that language isn't just an assembly of words. The meaning of the words comes through the use. And in the process, you have a language game. So if you're participating in a conversation, the conversation generates its own language game, and any ambiguity fades away, because that's the way a language game operates. So if you have a first-person speech, you also have a third-person record. So the word is never view-free, but neither is the record that it creates. Hence the language game. And objectivity is not view-free. It cannot be. It's impossible. And that's why I have this image there of people contributing to these reports. They have created an objective report. It starts with participation. It's second, and these three terms are very important to get. It's stabilizing, and then you have later on interpretation. And the interpretation is third person. So that is the important part. So objectivity, again, I'm repeating, is stabilized perspective made shareable. Now, I can now say we're now into the juicy bits. It get more and more interesting, and bear with me. So objectivity is not view-free. It affects community trust. It affects relationships. And it does so in, I just labeled a few here: physics, economics, law, medicine, education, institutions. Okay? What? I just wanted to just interrupt the process. It was a bit heavy going. Look, I took this photograph a few months ago here in Melbourne. It was a demonstration. It was a very interesting experience for a newcomer, as I am. I'm an immigrant to Melbourne from Perth. And I came to Melbourne and I thought I'd go and see what was happening. And boy, I was really into it. And in the part of the screen there, you can see the can. Well, I'm not sure it was the same can, but I had that can thrust in my face at one time by one of these policemen here. I was only watching. Look, anyway, what I'm introducing here is the concept of standpoint. And this is now where it starts to get interesting. Standpoint. So the first important part I'm going to say is many of these conflicts, whatever they are, whatever you want, if it's in philosophy and science, on here it was about immigration, and there are other points. It's always It's not so much about the truth. That's the common way of putting it. I suggest it's about standpoint. And that starts to become very interesting, particularly when we get into the area of economics. And I'm going to introduce another topic here in a moment. So you will find when you hear the debate, you can actually come back to these 2 points. It's either a system level, that is third person, or it's often the lived experience. Now, it's a bit polar, and sometimes you get a little bit of an in-between, but by and large, that holds true, in my view. So both may be valid, but may be answering very different questions. And to be alert, I mean, we're now starting to open up where we're getting to. We're getting to where I think the juice is, and it's the aha moment. And hopefully some of you will get that aha moment. And if it doesn't come today, well, maybe you might remember in a year or two's time and thought, oh, yeah, maybe he has a point. He's talking a bit woo to me, but maybe he has a point. I hope so. But anyway, it was for me. So democracy is often raised and talked about with fervent enthusiasm. I'm not sure that we understand what the word democracy really means. Certainly, it points to the limits of first-person aggregation. Remember, voting aggregates preferences, yes, but it doesn't share experience. The policies are designed for populations, not for persons. You could say, yeah, but that's, what you're talking about is idealism. You're not, you've got to be realistic. Yeah, all of that may be true, but let's go on. I'm suggesting that legitimacy requires more than just counting. It's more than that. It requires being heard and feeling like you're being heard. Because what is happening is that participation is becoming procedure. And democracy just becomes arithmetic. It's numbers. I raised it before about why the third person is dominant. Here's another angle. Not quite another angle, but saying it in a different way, because I'm hopefully that you'll get it. If I come from different angles, perhaps eventually you might get to see what I'm talking about. So the individuals participate and generate events. The records are made so that others can consult them. The systems coordinate many people through the shared records, and over time, the records lose their origin, they lose their context. They're standing there without the context, and then they begin to pass as reality. We never stop to ask are we here in Australia, for example, and if you're overseas in your country, are you really living in a reality? Are those rules really necessary? They had a particular context at the time, whether it be at the time, when we became Australia, or after the American Revolution. So systems run on descriptions that have often forgotten the lives that generate them. So they're living there, 100 years on or 200 years on. And they're living on and they've lost their context. And we quote them and we may call up the rules, but without regard to the fact that they were shaped in a different era. So I'm suggesting that a country exists as a shared narrative. It's a law, a structure. It has no location. It has no first-person experience. That's why perhaps Yuval Harari talks about a country being a fiction. The thing is, individuals live, act, and even die in its name. What's happening in the Ukraine? I am a Ukrainian. I have a right. And the Gazans, I have a right. Yeah. So the third person description organizes society, but the first person has to bear the consequences of that, and there may be a gap. Okay. Let me give you a meaty example of what I'm talking about. And this is just one example, one of many. that I won't raise. I'll just give you this one. This one that I particularly like. And it's this graph. It's a graph of gross domestic product. Gross domestic product is a term that economists use. It's a measure of the amount of value adding that a country produces. I don't know whether that one is a deflated one, but let's just stay with the fact that it's an aggregate measure of gross domestic product. And you will often hear on the news, and particularly the politicians, they will say, oh, look, the economy grew by 2%, 1%, whatever. And we think, oh, well, that's good, that's good. Yeah, that feels good. Yeah. That's the blue line. Shows a nice steady growth. You'll note that here, just here, there's a little flat point here. That was during COVID, when we had the shutdowns. Well, it didn't dip, it was flatline. Not bad, it's not a bad kid. But here, let me introduce an inconvenient truth. And it is an inconvenient truth. I'm talking about what does it does for us. We are the shareholders. We could call ourselves the shareholders of Australia. How are we as shareholders experiencing the economy? How is our real wages going? How is our share of the gross domestic product going? And here's the growing gap. Can you see that gap there? And it's growing. And why is it growing? Because you see, if you bring in more people, obviously the gross domestic product will prima facie at least, will increase. You've got more bodies, more churning. Of course it will rise. But what about the per capita? And that's flatlining. But you don't hear this. You do not get this. And so many reports come out like that. And that's why I call it an inconvenient truth. That is the reality. And this happens so much in reports particularly from government. Now, I was a new resident. I was an immigrant to Melbourne, and I was staggered when I heard this. I heard this was emanated from Canberra, and they called Melbourne the crime capital of Australia. Even the ABC hopped on the bandwagon and how Melbourne became the crime capital. You know what? I actually feel safer in Melbourne than I did in Perth. Really. And look, it's only a feeling. And, hey, I'm only one person. And you could say, well, look, you live here for a while, blah. You can easily make a case. I wasn't happy about it. So, all of these things supporting the argument. But, I did a little bit of research on that. And I came up with this. This is the per capita crime rate. Per capita. And look at that. Look at that red bar there. It's 1/3 less than the other major capital cities. Yes, it's 50% more than the ACT, but there is no validity. There's no validity to the argument that the crime capital, because the person that experiences crime is represented with the per capita incident. But on the aggregate basis, you may get slightly different statistics. Now, before somebody jumps in and says, yeah, but you're talking about the state. That is about the crime capital of Australia. The state is not the capital, and the capital is not the state. Yes, you know what? I don't care. I'll tell you why. Because you see, I'm saying again, Victoria is not Australia's highest per capita violent crime state. Fact. What is weaker is that the statement is about Melbourne as a city. Now, because I can't get the statistics, they're not available. So anybody makes that accusation hasn't got any more information than I have. Because the local government areas, LGAs, says the rate of recorded offence per capita in the other areas other than Melbourne is lower, or as I put it in a way, the LGA for Melbourne is higher. So I can safely say, but in a bit of noise, that Melbourne still remains a safer place. No small point, because once you tune into what I'm talking about, you'll see evidence of it every day. And that is why part of the reason when I listen to the radio in the morning before I make breakfast, I turn off the radio when I hear the blare of trumpets announcing the news. I turn it off. It's noise to me. And besides, my wife gets terribly irritated by me ranting about, oh, you can't say that. You've got to contextualize it. And these systems-oriented people, the politicians in particular, are talking on the aggregate. They're talking on the aggregate. I don't care about the aggregate. I'm a person. I'm real. Oh, did I? What happened here? Okay. Oh, yeah. Okay. Now, I was walking through Sydney and St. Peter's, and I love street art. I don't know. I'm a bit of a photographer, and I love walking around and taking photographs of street art. And some of it is very colourful. This is rather nothing, but it got me a little bit upset when I saw this. See where I got my circle? Conviction for those responsible. This is about Aboriginal deaths in custody, and you see a number on the left side there, 432. Now, there was a royal commission into Aboriginal deaths in custody. That's expensive, and it created heat in the economy. Look, I realise this is a sensitive topic, and please, I don't want to debate this. This is a sideshow, and I want to stay with the generality, please. Let's not have a debate about this, but I'm still going to just introduce it, because you see, I took that on and did a little bit of reading. You see, I'm underemployed and my head's too active. And I did some reading up, and I'm concluding this, that there was, on the aggregate, on a systems basis, you can say what you like about Aboriginal deaths and custody, and there is validity to 432. But what the Royal Commission failed to do was to contextualize it, bring it back to the third person. And I'm prepared to say, and I wrote to Four Corners a few days ago and alerted them to the fact that the Royal Commission failed to explain something. And as I said in my last line there was something that was explicitly assumed, because the relative inequality, that is, there's 1.26 times as many Aboriginals dying in prison compared to non-Aboriginals. Yes, okay, that's not good. We'd like to see it on the same rate. Yes, of course we will. But what you're not saying, explaining away that non-Aboriginal people died at something around 2 to 2.5 times. So there was a significant compression, and that was not considered in the Royal Commission. Now, all I'm wanting to do here is to stress that there is a system perspective and there is an experience perspective. So on the basis of the data, to conclude, and before I go on to the next slide, the experience in an incarcerated Aboriginal person is for a safer place than it is outside. Much more so than it is for the white peoples. And I felt it was a slight. It was a slight on the prison officers to have that, what I have here, that circle part here, conviction for those responsible. No, if I was the Prison Officers Association, I would defend my members and say, look, it's actually a safer place. Don't use this and make us seemingly responsible for the higher death. It's got nothing to do with us, and that's an honest statement, and it's not been investigated. What happens a lot in reporting, and this is dominant in reports from government, is you have these concentrated benefits and distributed costs. What I mean by that, we might talk about aggregate growth, but what about the impact of immigration, for example, and aggregate growth and the house prices? I've talked about these graphs, and I've talked about this, the aggregate and the fact that you in ignoring by promoting, oh, look how it's growing, you're ignoring the first person. What are our real wages doing? What about the renters? What about the infrastructure, the congestion, demand on services, etc.? That's that flattening there. It's a point, and this comes out all the time and the time. Let's be clear, this asymmetry is advantageous to the political actors. It happens all the time. It's not an original thought. It was documented by Remco Olsen, and he wrote some interesting books. And I happened to read that some years ago. Now, here's another thing that's happening. Global warming. There's no question, we know with the records are showing that the world is heating up. And we call it climate change. It's an abstraction. So what does the abstraction look like? Well, that's what we're used to seeing, isn't it? We're seeing climate change. We hear about the water level rising, pollution, glaciers, rising sea levels, and all the other factors. So where does that information come from? Where is the source of relevant input for response? I'm suggesting what's happening is that procedure is replacing participation. What I'm saying is, here we have the conference of the parties. Note that it names of the actors, not the experience. It's legitimacy through agreement. It's a procedural architecture that determines the responsibility, and the lived reality is mediated through abstraction. I put these people at COP, Conference of the Parties. I call it a conclave of the priests. Because that's who they might as well be, because they're producing all these reports and they're churning out and nothing is happening. We know the CO2 is rising, we know temperatures are increasing, we have the data, but there's no behavioural change. And why is that? Well, here we are, we've got the data. What about they? What's their feeling? So it's not a failure of the data, it's a failure of connection. We need first-person experience. Let's look at something really close to home. Now, if you're in Australia, and I was interested to note that the case, first of all, let me just stay here. The court relies on structured, stabilised evidence. The verdicts are built from records, not lived experience. Now, I was really, really interested with this particular case. What the court can see, and it doesn't matter whether you're talking about the United States or Australia, are these measures. Time-stamped events. You've got measurable traces. You've got admissible fragments, right? This is evidence of the court. That's the foundation of justice in the courts. And these are fragments which are stabilized for judgment. In other words, we stick labels on, put them in envelopes, or whatever is necessary. It's agreed that this is the resource for the court to make its judgment. So let's look at a recent case. It's a high-profile case. It involved a mushroom meal. It involved multiple deaths. It involved digital searches, documents, and timelines. I'll explain it in a moment. Facts. And as you can see on the orange plate on which the mushroom meal was, one meal was kept on an orange plate. You probably know what I'm talking about. So what the court doesn't see is that first-person context. The patterns of connected events, the story, the lived experience, the fear, the grief, the confusion, relationships, meaning, why things matter to those involved. This procedural objectivity is protecting fairness, yes, of course, but it also creates blind spots. It's where the responsibility and intent can disappear. And what do I mean by that? If we were to look at the whole story, and that's why I've got this image here of the Erin Patterson mushroom poisonings, under the rules of admissibility, the lived experience is excluded. I'm going to show you some of the things. And these became available in August last year in the ABC, the Guardian, SBS, etc. All of these items were not disclosed to the jury and to the court. You can read it. I don't need to go into the detail. And perhaps some of you may know a little bit more. I didn't want to go into too much detail. I just wanted to make a point here that information was withheld, and you could say, yeah, but for good reason. Well, hang in there, hang 10 here, hang 10, hang 10. Okay, good reason. So this point is important. The law requires the view from nowhere. Now, I've used that word carefully here because that is the predominant view that was science, and particularly Isaac Newton, introduced, the point from nowhere. There was no point more relevant. There was a unit, for example, and throughout my presentation, I'm drifting in different domains, but I'm trying to hang it together with the same language. So I'm using the word, the view from nowhere. That's what Isaac Newton held, over 2 centuries ago. The view from nowhere, that is what the law practices. It's using an attitude that was very strong at the time of Newton, at the time of the Enlightenment. It's a glass box. You notice, by the way, the court is in a glass box, and we're sitting out here as the audience outside. The facts are purified. The context is excluded. You know, the bits that I referred to that wasn't disclosed until August, that's noise. It was too ambiguous. Collectively, another story is there, isn't there? But the fragments, they're stabilized into records. They're the approved events. That. And what is missing? And I'm putting it provocatively. The jury is entrusted with the human story. They simply say, we, can I sound biased and say, we, the robed, we, the wigged, we in our glass box will determine what the jury can see because we know better. And you can make a story, okay. This is not an attack on the system. I'm forewarned that I don't want to get into this in actual personal detail. I am simply sharing a viewpoint. It fixates what she did, but not how she lived it. It replaced the participant with a detached description. In other words, she's barely there. The fear, the motives, the fear of Simon, we need to share with his GP. The experience was not allowed. It was too subjective. The fact that searches were done on mushrooms from a laptop owned by the defendant under a false name. All of that is all circumstantial individually, but collectively, you start to get a sort of a bit of an issue. In any event, it's a human issue. Why not have the jury involved in that? They're mature enough. Why should the Whig ones have primacy over it? And it's interesting, a summary point there on the bottom left, you can see that the judgment is rendered in the third person, right? Third person, clearly. But punishment is always first person. I think it's rather interesting. There's a little play there. It's not a flaw. It's the design. It's the way the court operates. The law's in a bubble. I had it in a glass box, call it in a bubble. It requires third person stability. But life unfolds into first person experience. Acts are admissible, but lived experience is not. And you have to ask yourself, why has this persisted? Because science has transformed. The rules of disembodied evidence, on the other hand, have barely changed. There's the Blackstone principle. It was a principle that a jurist in about the 1700s came up with. He said, we'd rather have 10 people go off who are guilty than one person wrongly incarcerated or wrongly punished. But don't forget something here, that wrongful punishment is visible. If a person's been in prison for 30 years and for a murder, and then to have them released, that's embarrassing for the system. But on the other hand, this is the asymmetry. The escape guilt leaves no trace. In other words, the person that's let off by the court doesn't leave a trace. There's no record. There's no, very often there's an asymmetry in the legal system. And I'm going to be provocative and say that the wig and the robe protects itself, tilting towards acquittal. There is a bias in the system. Let's be clear. On the guise of the Blackstone principle. Okay. Look, I make no judgment about the law. Oh, yes, I am. No, I will say that. We need to be aware that that is how the court operates. And it's a recurring pattern across lots of domains. In physics, we have it in law, in education, where we have knowledge without participation. And I've shown some examples of how it operates with government, with taking a systems view. So we have mastered description and misplaced the experience. And what has happened, and I don't know whether Stephen is here today, but we had a presentation a few weeks ago about when the maps, seeing the map and not seeing the world. Well, Stephen, if you're here today, I'm picking up your point here. So we have the various domains. I've got a list there. Forgive me for including cooking, but you're seeing I mentioned it earlier. Let me include it. The map and what is lost and what comes back. So in physics, we've got something. Let's just, we've got the observer problem. I haven't gone into too much detail. I didn't want to make a quantum mechanics lecture out of it. We have, in law, we have the fragments. What is lost is the gestalt. I like that term. Gestalt is where the bits and pieces hide the bigger picture. That's the concept of gestalt, where it's bigger than the bits, the sum of the bits. It's missing in law, and we get mechanical justice. There's no humanity. We have education. It's becoming credentialism. And you get a certificate and it shows you're capable of studying. To what extent is it relevant to being that particular vocation? I suggest that become increasingly credentialed. That's what's my feeling of my too many years of university. Politics, I've talked about it. We've got aggregates, we've got the lived cost, and in that gap, we have that public distrust. And it's there. And it's growing. In cooking, we heard the cook talk about the recipe and the beingness of being a cook, and there's a gap. It's technically correct. It's flat. In health, in work, you got productivity metrics. Yeah, okay. But you also, what is lost is that feeling of vocation and that joy, and you get burnout. In art, now I hope you got your $1,000 in your pocket, because we're going to have an example in a moment of how you can spend your $1,000. I'm going to ask you where you would spend it. Warming. You have, just had my dear lady point out it's 3:18 and I'm going over time. All right, now we're on the homeward leg now. We're very close to finishing, but thank you, my dear wife. This image here. Knowledge became shareable under the Greeks, and the cost was made invisible. We have gratitude to the ancient Greeks. They took us from the, let's call it the Dionysian period, as Nietzsche referred it, into the Apollonian. The Enlightenment institutionalized this separation between the objective and the subjective. But I'm suggesting very strongly that society has yet to become aware of the cost. We inherited a separation that has a blind spot. And that blind spot, in the case of law, as we said, is the human factor. It's part of it. And he warned us, Nietzsche warned us, and there's my little thing there, that rationalism has displaced lived wisdom. And as Einstein showed, there is no absolute in space or time. There is no universal clock. There is no view from nowhere. The first and third-person asymmetry isn't philosophical, it's structural. And McGilchrist locates that asymmetry in modes of attention through a neurological account. I'm proposing here to build on that, is to say, thank you, Ian. That was very helpful. It was very helpful for me. But I think we need to recognize that the neurological is also seen in the real world. And quantum mechanics locates that asymmetry in the term measurement. I'm sorry for some of you, it may sound a little bit, what is he talking about? I haven't got time. I'm having to compromise. I spent a lot of time in preparing it, wondering what I should include and what I should exclude. I'm obviously going to miss the target for some, but I just felt on balance I would do it this way. So you've got to remember that where the first person begins isn't just subjective, it's where the account begins. The third person objectivity is stabilized, it's not view free. And calling it, a little bit defensiveness, call it impractical, misses the point. It answers a different question, and that's ignored. So we have a ladder, and I have in mind Wittgenstein's ladder here, that those who climbed it, when you climb the ladder, once you get it, you discard the ladder. It's there, it enables you to see. So the first person and third person, what I'm presenting here is an awareness. But once you get it, you can discard that divide. You don't have to think about it anymore. Just having that awareness will shift your view of the world. It will shift your connection, your relationship, perhaps, hopefully, it will shift your debate with other people when you think back, well, what is this person? Where is that person standing? The third or the first person? And that will help you see that they have a perspective, however skewed it may be, however what's the word I'm looking for? Conspiracy minded that person, there is still a valid communication taking on. So we're getting into the tail end of it now in the last few slides. And, getting back to 1923, that's 103 years ago, there was that meeting between these two great men. And his view was that reality is independent of observation. And I'm still hearing that. I'm still hearing that from some people, that reality is independent of observation. Whereas Niels Bohr, and both of them, by the way, can be looked upon as the grandfathers of theoretical, the very foundations of science and quantum mechanics. Both Einstein and Bohr contributed. But for Bohr, physics speaks only of the observable phenomena. And they argued about reality, but I'm going to suggest that neither of them analyze how the interaction becomes an irreversible public fact. I need to state that jargon. You can unpack it. If you have a question, come back on it, why I used the word irreversible public fact. Debate took the existence of record for granted, and that's where they failed to have the language. They're very close to it. But if you've got to accept that the record precedes the description, your interpretation. And here's a rather poignant image. I couldn't find an image of Einstein being sad, and perhaps I felt I put this up. Okay, that was 1923. We're clicking on 22 years on. In 1955, that was the year in which Einstein died, he wrote a letter. You can read that. Can I just take a moment for you to read it? Or maybe I can just speak it through. People like us who believe in physics know that the distinction between the past, present, and future is only a stubbornly persistent illusion. He wrote that to his friend Besso. He wrote it to the family of Besso when he died. So what does that mean? So I'm saying, so even our strongest third-person theories, such as general relativity, cannot define the present without a lived participation. cannot describe without the first person. It raises the question, what is a fact? What is the present? Or did it only appear when experience becomes a record? And we could imagine, if we could adopt that, if we could start to think like that, just be aware of what is actually happening, we're going to get changes. When I've got these three faculties, under science, or domains, we get measurement, you can read that for yourself. Certainly, there's no view from nowhere neutrality. That's what general relativity showed. And we all agree on that. And society, where the law weighs lived experience, not just verdict. And education invites participation, not just transmission. And institutions become accountable to experience, not just procedure, not just credentialing. And the self, that's what the important bit, and that's why hopefully why we're here. I certainly was most enthused about this. It's about me. As attention becomes a practice, not a distraction. And silence, as for example with the damaged aircraft, becomes a source of knowledge, not an absence. Listen to the silence. It's relevant. You can't record it. And the observer is not a problem to be solved, but a presence to be met. Sounds a bit poetic, but I couldn't. The observer is returned, and the world is brought, and the world is brought back. Okay, as I said, we're now at the tail end, and if you've got your $1,000, I'm going to make you an offer. What's this about? Well, this is a painting, and the painting was damaged by a child. I was in a Dutch museum, and these are the people that were handling that Rothko. Some of you will recognize this Rothko painting. Would you pay $1,000 for this painting? It's valued at 100 million Aussie dollars. Now I'm asking you, would you pay $1,000 for this Rothko painting? Of course, you might say, yes, of course I will, because I can make some money on it. No, that's not the point. You're missing the point. Would you pay $1,000? Because a first person encounters just colors. A third person encounters hierarchy. Hierarchy. Why is he saying this? I'll come back to that in a moment. Because their value is stabilized by institutions. And that's not an original idea by any means. There was a philosopher called Bourdieu. And he said art is a term of distinction. Because you see, if you can see the beauty and the harmony and see talk about how the colors are just so perfect and the way that the proportions and the little bit of fuzziness around the edge, you sound erudite. And somebody who has the money can put the money towards it and immediately show to the world how wealthy they are, how they can see the value in that. So I'm suggesting that a first person would say, just some colors on a bit of canvas. And the third person could say, oh, yeah, but look, I'll let you draw your own conclusion. I just wanted to introduce that as an expression to make that distinction between the first and the third person, because I would suggest that the first person will struggle to pull out their $1,000 for that. But anyway, that's just a viewpoint. Okay, so we're nearly finished now. And I teach them to be happy. Now, I'm sorry if the sound is not coming through very well. I have a feeling that there was some setting in PowerPoint that I missed and my wife hasn't come to sort me out, so I'm going to have to leave it as such. And this is a clip from the movie Where Will We Invade Next? It's very brief, only 1 minute. Made in 2015, and Michael Moore, who produced it, is in Finland, and he's talking to some teachers. Now, remember, in Finland, to be a teacher, you will have a master's degree. You'll be certainly highly paid, and it's highly competitive and a very small percentage of applicants get the position because they value education. But having said that, just listen to the conversation.
If there was one thing I heard over and over again from the Finns, it was that America should stop teaching to a standardized test.
We got rid of poetry.
Really?
Yeah.
Why?
It's a waste of time. When are they ever going to learn? When are they ever going to speak as poets when they're adults? How does that help them get a job?
But school is about finding your happiness, finding finding a way to learn what makes you happy.
Thanks.
What you are teaching your students is to do well on those tests, and you're not really teaching them anything.
You're concerned with their happiness.
Oh yeah?
What the hell do you teach?
I teach math.
So the math teacher says the first thing out of your mouth of what you wanted these students to get out of school was to be happy, to have a happy life.
Okay, I don't know whether you heard the sound. The maths teacher teaches happiness. I had such a teacher, funny enough. I was a chemistry teacher at high school. He taught me happiness. And I loved chemistry. And I became top in the state in chemistry. I loved it. Then I went to university and it killed something in me. I still became a chemical engineer, but something went missing. I had to drag myself through uni. I loved it at school. Anyway, the real difference isn't the subject matter. It's how the learning is delivered. And it's formed through participation, and that's what the Finns are doing. So teaching, it can be a recipe or it can be a relationship. So ultimately, this is where it is. I think this is my second last slide. This whole process, my whole presentation, is about reclaiming that first person that we've lost. We're conditioned to it, and it's very hard to see. Some of you will probably have your machine guns ready for me. It's about reclaiming that first person in everyday thinking. It's about being. It's very hard to shake off. It's taken me years to shake off that conditioning of, and I saw the world through the gratitude of that third person conditioning. I was so good at investing, before I became educated. And I sort of remember saying to my wife, look, when we bought this expensive apartment in Newcastle, as an investment, and I said, oh, look, I'm an economist and I know these things. Or maybe I didn't say it quite as ruthlessly as I'm sharing now. Perhaps I didn't say it. Perhaps I thought of it a long time ago, but I always remember the incident. Anyway, I didn't see the real world, and that's what happens. So education trains us to be aware that education trains us to know about the world, rarely how to know from within it. We learn to describe. Another area, and I'm so guilty of that, the intuitive mind is often demoted, treated as informal, unreliable, and unscientific. And this is fact, that much of the cognition occurs before conscious reasoning can explain it. This is well explained by Daniel Kahneman in Thinking Fast and Slow. It's well explained by Ian McGilchrist, just to cite two books as well, well expressed by Einstein, who made a comment about the intuitive mind. Here we are, that's what I forgot about that, yes. He trusted his intuition, I didn't. I trusted knowledge, and that sat between me and reality. It resonates with Ken Robinson's comment on TED. Professors are heads without bodies. And firsthand, I've had that experience in dealing with them outside of university. That, how they I like this expression. This is my second last slide. Edmund Husserl, he made a statement. He wrote it, actually. I think he was embarrassed to say this. The original arc Earth does not move. He was an existentialist. He was a phenomenologist, very much about the first person, very strongly about, we don't have a sense directly that our Earth is actually moving. We could equally go back to the time of the Egyptians and say the sun is rotating around the Earth. It doesn't matter. But we're smarter now. We're better educated. We know that we move around the Earth, and we know that even the sun is rotating around its, through the cosmos. And it's an important statement, and this is where my eye comes forward. And it's important to get that the arc Earth is just a metaphor for the frame through which all frames appear. We theorize from within it, but we can't step outside of it. And so my last slide, and this is my last one. Do I hear sounds of relief? We have here a representation of space-time, with time and space as the coordinates. And we have a man standing there with a torch shining on space-time, looking at that particular part of the world. It's a bit symbolic. And so here we have our two scientists there before the great split in this on space-time. And I'm saying they could have reconciled, as I promoted, by recognizing that the interpretation comes after the record. And that is a key point. So thank you. You have my name, and down below, if you're interested, you can note my email address if you'd like to correspond with anything. And that's the end of my presentation. And I'm sorry, David, I've gone somewhat over time. It was a trade-off I have to make. This is probably my last. Let me stop sharing. Let me see. We should be able.
Well, thank you, Remco, for your presentation.
Yeah.
Now, before we throw the meeting open to questions, comments, and discussion with Remco, I have a couple of announcements. The first of which is that the next Existential Society lecture discussion will take place in 1 month's time. That's on Saturday, the 4th of April at this time. But if you're in North America, for example, it'll be the evening before. Now, Lev Lafayette will be addressing the Existential Society on the decline of French philosophy. I'll repeat that, the decline of French philosophy. Now, the Existential Society has weekly Zoom sessions at this time where they feature a number of different groups. And so if you want the details and the Zoom links, the best method of getting that is on the Existential Society's meetup page. And I'll put the link to it in the chat so you can that way discover the weekly topics and Zoom links. Now, for our questions, comments, and discussion session, we'll use the raised hand method so we can get you speaking in turn without interrupting each other. So for those who don't know where the raised hand icon is, you'll find it in the React tab at the bottom of your screen. So, Derek, it's your turn.
Okay, thank you very much for that, Remco. I'm sure that this was very useful for a lot of people, some of which I can see at this meeting, but for who, I don't know. It wasn't very useful for me. But nevertheless, that's not the criterion by which we should judge these meetings. What I would like to say is that you're talking about the third person divide and the contrast between analytic and continental thinking, and you present it much more strongly than I think it exists. And I think that Yeah, this is why it's important for some people, but I don't think it's a great. I mean, there are some places in the world where this dichotomy, exists. But for example, I think that your quote about the view from nowhere is presented by Thomas Nagel as a incoherent view. And when I look at modern thinkers, I can't think of people. I can't find people in the forefront at least who have this dichotomous view. Most people have integrated these views, like Bernard Williams, or perhaps even myself. Yes, I mean, I don't think it's a big. Okay, sure. When we get to some of the more crass aspects, of society, like politics, where we have to put things in very crude terms, then you get it. But at the refined aspects, of society, like in philosophy, it doesn't seem to be very prominent. Also, I'm glad you open the door to the idea to another idea, because you're working through an idea. Excuse me if I'm taking a bit of time. You're working through an idea that's difficult to get to grips with for some people. For some people, it's secondhand. Okay, but another idea that's difficult for some people to get to grips through is the idea of consciousness. I mean, you describe it as practically just a word, a abstraction. I put it to you that consciousness is one of the biggest breakthroughs in modern thought. It is an integration. With that concept of a consciousness, we understand what we are. We have all our mental states within one concept, and for the first time we can say, I think, therefore I am. Consciousness is like a revelation. It's like understanding for people who are converted into a belief in God. All their values and ideas are integrated into the concept of God, and it gives them a fantastic insight and a fantastic, experience. In my view, the same thing can be had with a consciousness, but a lot of people struggle with it, but lots of reasons that can be explained. Like you mentioned, Husserl said there were, intrinsic problems with grasping the idea of consciousness. There are not only, social problems and psychological problems and linguistic problems, that we don't have the words or the structures to grasp this idea. But I put it to you that consciousness is a hugely, overlooked concept that perhaps yourself have overlooked as the central point to the notion of subjectivity. Okay, I will just leave it at that.
Oh, thank you, Derek. I knew it would be an incisive question from you, and we've often looked at each other a bit askance about the other, and we're seeing it today. Look, I think perhaps I'll concede to this, that I fell in a bit of a trap in being too binary. The third person is included in the first person. All I'm saying is that the first person is the source of from which the record is made. What is then, let's call it, for me to communicate, I need to create a record. And once the moment I do that, I could say I'm socializing the information. I'm socializing. I like that term because it enables others to understand where I'm coming from. Okay, that is the principle of Greek thinking. And that was the big breakthrough, which is perfect at the time. But I think we need to grow, grow is not the right word. We need to be aware that we are losing something in this communication process. And that is, once you have that perception, then you look at what is coming. As I said, that's why I took these various examples to illustrate the point, Derek. I took those points that we're getting this information and it's third person and it's losing contact with the fact that I am a person, I'm not a country. So why are you addressing the country and not the person? And that is the distinction between a first and a third person. And you see this everywhere. I mean, even the price of gold. Just take a mundane example. The price of gold, when it's recorded every day, reported every day. Notice that it is not in Australian dollars. It's in an Australian newspaper, and it quotes it in US dollars. Well, look, if you've got US dollar holdings, it may be relevant. If you're an international institution, it may be relevant. But I'm an Australian and I hold an Australian currency. I want to know what the price is in Australian dollars, just like all these other evidence. And I think it's just having that awareness, just switching on and saying, I'm a person. And so getting back to your point about consciousness, about which we had some debate. Consciousness is something that you assign and describe in a body, but I'm not a body, I'm a person. I don't sense consciousness. And that's the end of, but if I have to describe it, I have to fall back to the third person. I'm very aware of Descartes' argument. I'm also aware of the dismissal of Descartes by others. And you can always get selective information to build up in your point of view. Because in Wittgenstein terms, what Descartes said is a private language and to be dismissed. So I can't go any further. Look, thank you, Derek, for your question. I've probably taken up a bit of time. There's quite a few hands up there. But if you have a quick come back on that, otherwise, let's leave it.
Okay, I'll come back very quickly. You say that consciousness is a body. To me, that is an incoherent statement. Talking about the ontology, consciousness had a different, ontology to the physical body. And not only that consciousness and physicality have different ontologies, but also, abstraction has, abstraction like numbers. They're different kind of things. So this should, open people's eyes to the diversity of the world, to these different kinds of things exist as real things and can't be just glossed over as different points of view.
Okay, thank you, Derek.
Stephen, your turn.
Yeah, I'm not entirely sure about the validity of your first-person argument. I think it might require a lot more in the way of examples as to what you're trying to get at, Remco. And yeah, I think I vaguely do remember the bit about the world's map. This was a warning from what's his name again? It was the philosopher Schelling. Yeah, Schelling was trying to warn everybody at the whole end of the German idealism that it has a bad side, that any system, any rational system, no matter how well you try to perfect it, is going to miss out on existence. As he more or less laid down that existence precedes essence. But I mean, the first person thing is the condition of a child, isn't it? As you progress, first you're aware of the object, the environment, and you progress by becoming aware that you are a being interacting with that environment. And the final progress is you can imagine yourself as parts of the environment. So that's the third person. So, I mean, the third person is the most advanced form of cognition, isn't it? So, I mean, we couldn't get very far with first person. I know, we had the example of, what was it? Windows. They kept on saying, my Windows, my computer. They're just trying to sell the softness of childhood to the dumb consumer yet again. So I think, Remco, you're going to have to sell your argument a bit better. This is a big world now. This is the price of gold, and this is the price of silver. This is where all the big things are in American dollars. And I think you need to sell your argument a bit better. Thank you.
Oh, thank you, Stephen. Well, as I say, I think the primary first step is to have that awareness. And if one comes like that, I don't expect you to get it in this first instance. That's why I hammered the point, and I took it from different dimensions, different domains, from different perspectives. Some are stronger than other, but I wanted to come from different angles because you cannot put your hands on it directly. All you can do is point and recognize that you have these pointers. I was thinking, and I'll conclude with that. I was thinking of just two examples, quick ones. One, a thermometer. If I take a temperature with a thermometer, let's say a mercury thermometer, and put it, I'm going back a few years, but the point is, you stick a thermometer under your armpit to have your temperature taken. There is actually an exchange of heat. You're not actually measuring the temperature. You're actually losing a bit of. The thermometer is actually being warmed. It's cooling your armpit. So that is the first indication of, it's not an objective measure. It is actually relative. Another example, and if there's any therapists here, there was an SBS series called In Therapy, which I really enjoyed. It was a French series, highly recommended. And the therapist was a psychologist dealing with a terrorist event in Paris some years ago. But the important point here was made that the therapist himself had to have therapy. So there was an exchange going on. So the traditional attitude is that you're dealing with the person, but you're not really. You are interacting with that person. There is an interchange. And if there's any, I think that's very profound. So all I'm saying, Steve, look, I'm not here to sell anything. I just took the time to share a perspective. I'm hoping that some of you might have got something out of it. I've done my bit. This may be my last webinar.
I can imagine you lined up with Gunnery Sergeant Hartman in the film Full Metal Jacket, and I'm wondering what name you'd give you.
Yeah. So with that, all I'm saying is, I've shared a perspective to the best of my abilities. I will translate this definitely.
Gunnery Sergeant Hartman will say that's not good enough.
Finish, please. You had your bit. I am translating this topic today into a book. I'm committing to that. I'm just sharing that. It probably will be my last webinar. And I've also got, subject to peer review, 2 papers with Elsevier, which are I've got past the editor, so it's going to be subject to peer review, which is going to, if it gets in, validate what I've been saying today. And that's all I can say is I've made my contribution. Thank you for your feedback, Steve.
Megan, it's your turn.
Okay, so I actually wanted to validate that I absolutely understood and agreed with your presentation. I really like it, and it kind of teases apart. I was cooking dinner while you were presenting, so I'm not sure I heard everything, but I wasn't sure if you touched on like the flow state and how the brain works together to weave that into like an ever-present like now sensation. And I see so sometimes I have difficulty talking because the way that my first person, my third person, I'm on the spectrum. My verbal stuff is like very low, but I'm super like pictures and visual spatial oriented. So I have really good like tactile and like artistic abilities, but like my verbal stuff, like trying to like get my ideas out, is sometimes a little muddled and it kind of sucks.
Yeah. Thank you, Megan. Sorry, did you get cut off there? Are you still there?
She might have got cut off. Hmm.
Yeah, she was starting to say
Anyway,
something.
we'll go to the. Sorry.
Yeah, no, okay, I can't. It seems like she was cut off and that's gone. Um, she was making a statement about her connection of the world and seeing things in pictures, but no, okay, we'll
I'll
have to
see if.
come back.
Yes, she seems to have disappeared off the list. So maybe she dropped out. George, it's your turn.
Hello. And thank you for the discussion. I caught the tail end of it. And there's two things that really stood out to me, and it's interrelated. Einstein talks about history. And you also talked about how you felt disconnected from, your chemistry education in university. And I think those two things are very interrelated because the physicist, and this is what Einstein's pushing against, the physicist will say there is no history, right? There is only the iteration of matter and energy being driven by the laws of physics, right? And in the sense that there's no history, is that water boils under certain conditions at 212 degrees Fahrenheit. Again, it boils in certain conditions. Now, a million years from now, a billion years from now, a million miles away, right? And so there is no history to that, in the sense that it is an iterative, replicated act, right? And that's the gold standard for physicists, right? To break down matter and energy, right, into these formulas, right? That again, the argument is that this is knowledge that transcends time. And Einstein is saying, look, there is history, right, in the development of knowledge, just by way of example, and where we stand today is very different than where we stood 50 years ago, for instance, or 100 years ago, and indeed 100 years ago affects what happens 50 years later, and then another 50 years later, right? So there's a history, and I think I connect this to your uni experience because I've read this critique about the physical sciences that students burn out and they drop out precisely because what they're studying is not connected to history, right? There's not a big picture in terms of why is this information important. And so it's very interesting that physicists push a concept of knowledge that by its very definition is alienating, right? That no one really cares at what degree, how water comes to a boil, right? What matters is context. Do people have energy to bring that water to boil, right? Can they make food, by way of example, right? And so it's boiling water in terms of shaping human history that's actually quite fascinating, right? I mean, just to put it that way. And so there is no point of view from nowhere, right? The physicists would say there is. The physicists would say, yes, we could reduce, and this is the analytic philosopher, says the gold standard is to reduce reality to a single formula, right? That we can get the essence of existence from a single formula and build out from there. But that's not reality. Reality is not a single formula. By any stretch of the imagination, we live in an ontology, a process. So even our point of view will radically change, right? Someone's a billionaire one day, they have one point of view. Tomorrow, they're on the street. Now they have a different point of view, and they may have a different a complete different understanding of reality. So again, this is, Einstein is, and I think Einstein's very underappreciated because, he talks about love, for instance, as a metaphysic, right? And so Einstein's very much pushing against the notion of the laws of physics and formulas as the end-all and be-all of physics, or even the end-all and be-all period, as we see with analytic philosophy, etc. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you, George. I think the important part to take out of why I introduced Einstein, because he did something that hadn't been fully expanded was that he introduced the idea that there was no absolute in reality. There is no absolute. That's what he said. There is no absolute. There is no universal clock in the universe. There's no absolute. Clock is a local phenomenon. He introduced relativism, and that's the big breakthrough. In another way of putting it, he introduced the first person into science. And for much of what you've said is third person. It's a discussion about the third person about in science. But I'm not talking about the third person. I'm talking about the relationship of the third person and the first person. And to make it clear, to address the opening, was that the third person is a component of the first person, but something is missing. Einstein didn't fully address it. He pulled a trick on us. He put us into boxes, and each little box, whether it be an inertial or an accelerating frame of reference, was a little box where we had everything normal. And that was his way of presenting it. It was his way of trying to avoid introducing the first person, because he wanted a reality out there that was that could be described without participation. And he was horrified by what quantum mechanics was showing. And he called it spooky. That was entanglement, the famous Einstein-Podolsky Rosenberg experiment. So just to wind up with that, George, just be careful that your conversation isn't entirely what I experienced at university. It was descriptive. It was describing things, but it wasn't talking about the experience, the reality, the first person. And that's where I come back. Anyway, I may not have satisfactorily answered you, George, but that would be my
Let me say this. I'm going to push back. And granted, I didn't hear the whole talk. Indeed, I only caught the tail end. So I'm sorry. So I may be stepping out of bounds here in this commentary, but it seems like what the first person is, and I think Einstein's pushing back against this. This idea that from the again, as a universal point of view, again, we could see the totality of reality, right, and understand the totality of reality from one point of view, from the first person point of view, right? Versus the idea that there are lots of other people out there and that these processes cannot be encompassed and understood in this way. So even the notion you bring up the issue of relativity, right? Now, my understanding of this is that the comment is much more so about rates of change, right? Rates of entropy, and that they vary. And that they vary. So again, it's pushing against this idea that you could come down to there is a perfect point of view, a perfect formula whereby you could analyze and understand reality. Hence the idea of pushing against universal. What's the phrase? Universal theory. So again, there's no in contrast, the world is very plural. The world has lots of different points of view, and there's lots of different realities for people in terms of the way they engage reality. But again, that's my sort of understanding in terms of I think where you're pointing at, or indirectly, or Einstein, etc. So thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you, Steve. George, sorry. George, I'm just going to say just briefly, I think what I'm hearing is third person. I'm hearing, notwithstanding the words you're using, I'm hearing a discussion from a third person perspective. I'm not hearing much first person from you. But look, that's just my view, and and thank you for your contribution, George.
Michelle, it's your turn. Go ahead, Michelle.
I'm looking. What is this? Momentarily, the speaker's name has left my. Oh, hold on, there you are, sir.
Remco.
Remco. Yes, an unusual name, but interesting. Anyway, Remco, thank you for your presentation. It was very interesting. Some of it I understood, some of it I did not. But a lot of it was new, which is not a bad thing necessarily. But to make it a little more accessible to your critics and to myself, I'll put forward this question. in the light of transcendence and immanence, and the first person being immanence, and the third person being transcendence, and with this analogy in mind, coming across a river, and then, you understand that's immanent. Yet, if you're, and then putting your foot or getting into the river and coming into contact with its current is no, coming into is immanence, and then just coming into contact with the river would be transcendence, but then getting into the current, feeling it, is immanent. With that in mind, how do you think you could bring this around to making it a little bit more accessible? I don't know if you understand my question, but yeah.
Well, I think I'm sorry, Michelle, but I think it was a little bit of a breakdown between us about the language game here. I don't fully understand your question. I mean, I hear the words, but I can't enter your world. And I think it's one thing if we had a more sort of open forum, somebody else might be able to come back. But I don't want to get trapped in semantics and transcendence terms. I'm dealing with the distinction between communicable, and I'm going to confine myself to that. And so I will be talking perhaps. I'm talking about the fact that what we're talking about is the distinction between the experience and the record, and what a record really is, and what a record actually represents. And that is the essence of what I'm talking about. And that's all I can talk about, because that is my limitation of my talk. And if I go beyond it, I'm not sure that I'll get trapped into semantics. I'm sorry, Michelle. Would you like to just come back?
Wait till 4:30 and I'll knock that one off first. Yeah.
No, I will say no. That was a good response, because it was a focused response, and I will say that again. Thank you for your presentation, and yeah, thank you.
Okay, thanks, Michelle.
Kerry, it's your turn.
Very much. Remco, I got a quick question for you. Do you think boundaries exist?
That's a good question from you, Kerry. I've heard other provocative questions. Do boundaries exist?
Mm-hmm. Because buried in your talk, I'm hearing this idea of our search for what's primary. And the act of doing that implies that there are differences and separations. And I think, at least in philosophy, this is one of the I hate to use the term primary questions, or at least one of the most intractable questions to confront. Because if they don't, we got problems.
Yeah, we do. I think a boundary is like that divide that I talked about, and it's that divide that we put band-aids over, which includes the band-aid of entanglement, the band-aid of consciousness, free will. These are from a first-person perspective. These terms don't exist. There is no gap. There is no boundary. It doesn't exist. From a third person perspective, yes, of course. And I think that would be my answer. And yeah, that's it.
Okay, so then our perspective would be just a nested relationship within something that's unbounded.
Yeah, exactly. No, it's not the experience. I don't experience a boundary. I mean, I might, in a physical sense, I might experience a sensation, but that's all you can say. And from a third person, yes, of course. And you can.
Perfect.
Yeah.
I'm going to quit while I'm ahead. Thank you.
Thanks, Kerry. Good one.
Will, go ahead. Whoop. Sorry. unmute yourself. That's it.
Thanks, David. Thanks, Remco. I really enjoyed it. Very thought-provoking. And it's just got me thinking about something I heard recently, which kind of relates to what Kerry just asked as well. In that, so from a Buddhist perspective, Buddhist philosophy, there's no essential aspect to anything. So there's no essential essence to any given phenomena. So you can't point at a tree and say, this is the tree, this part of it. It's not the tree. Everything is arising as determined by the observer, which now that I've heard this notion, and it sort of ties in, I think you'll get what I'm saying. And I think Donald Hoffman alludes to this as well, that everything we experience, it's a manifest image, as DLJ has sort of said in the past as well, that everything, there's a scientific image and then there's the manifest image, and the manifest image is subject to the observer. And I just find that so interesting that it's the sort of inherent qualities of the observer that determine what the phenomena will, not what, but how it will arise. I mean, so an example, when I was sort of having a debate in my own mind about this, so I thought, what about a tree? I mean, if you walk into a tree, so it's not there with your eyes closed, if a dog's looking at the tree, the dog's going to perceive different colors, which is all subject to the attributes of its visual capabilities and how the rods and cones in its retina, for instance, translate the data, the photons, and it might see very different colors, for instance. And, that's just one aspect of how we experience the world. But then I thought, yeah, but the tree's there, whether you got your eyes closed or not, it's still there when you walk into it. But then I thought of neutrinos. Is it neutrino? Yeah, neutrinos. They will go straight through a tree. And again, this is another scientific fact that can be integrated with this arising of the phenomena dependent on the attributes of the observer. So if the observer, for instance, in this thought experiment was made of neutrinos, the tree kind of wouldn't be there because you would go straight through it if you were made of neutrino. So I just find that really interesting, and sort of I'll wind up now. I don't want to blab on too much, but in regards to what Kerry said, like, are there boundaries? And I'd say the boundaries are subject to interpretation as well in the conscious mind. Otherwise, there are no boundaries. The boundaries are purely as assessed, as conceptualized, as abstracted. Then the boundaries arise, whatever they might be. Anyway, I hope that made some sense. And thanks again, Remco. Very thought-provoking. I love your work. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Steve. Look, I think your comments, and that's helpful, and some of the preceding ones have a common thread. And that you have to remember that you have to have the experience, then you have the record, and then, only then, do you have a description. And you might say that's a rather cutesy way of avoiding something. But if you follow it through, and if you do a little bit of reading up, you could read up about Landau's experiment where information takes energy, requires energy. And well, I think that was in the, trying to think back on what time era it was. It doesn't matter. The point is Landau, if you want to look it up, read up, that knowledge doesn't come without energy. So to create a record, even in your mind, if your mind is rewired, that's a record, just like a mark on paper. And until there is some record, and in the case of law, the record is the signature on the paper, that is done by the judge, then you have a record, then you have something that's discussable, that you can discuss and debate and do something with, but you must have that record first. And so a lot of the debate, a lot of the discussion, and including your example of neutrinos and the behavior, is all third person stuff. I'm not diminishing it. It's just a recognition. if you can recognize that what you're dealing with is third person information, and if you get that, then that's a big breakthrough. Not to diminish, maybe again, remember that the third person is a subset of first person. There is something missing in the third person, and that's all you need to remember. And a lot of the debate just fades away. It becomes it's not very satisfying if you're a materialist. And that's the majority view. You know, I mean, it's the most comfortable one. It's the one we grow up and to be conditioned with. But if you're prepared to stand back, as I'm trying to do here, you get a different view of your relationship with the world. That's all I can say, Steve. Did I
Will,
more or less
that's
answer
Will.
the question, or did I avoid it?
No, that makes sense. I'll digest that and think about it further. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Will.
Megan, go ahead.
Okay, I just want to finish my point. So the way that I was digesting what was said was like so like art is a physical description of an embodied sensation, like feeling, right? Something that it's a language, it's a visual language. So just like so that first person view is what we naturally live in. And the third person is like, you know, the other part of the brain that is narrating, right, what is going on and creating the plan, creating the map for the other part of the brain, right, the one that's navigating the physical space to follow. And the way that I see it, like the example of how Pacific Islanders would track the sky, right? And they read nature. They read everything as like a full holistic picture that's coming in through their senses, right? And they like the cognition comes in when there's the recognition and there's something that needs to be shared. Because until it needs to be shared and it becomes a social system, it can stay within one person and it can stay knowledge. And knowledge does not necessarily have to be language bound. It can be felt, it can be sensed, it can be embodied, and it can be measured by your senses in a way that you don't need the cognition part. And I think what you were saying towards the end is like what does it have to do with like our happiness and society and things like that going forward? How can it help us? And I'm a huge advocate for people finding what helps them, like what helps them embody something that they are passionate about so that they can know something in a more holistic way and then take that and like maybe they need to make maybe new language needs to be created, maybe something needs to be adapted or evolved to be shared in a certain way, but new knowledge can come forth from people experiencing things and then try, and that's another thing is that language, right, it really does, it fixes the ideas and it fixes the objects and the sense perceptions, right, in a certain way. And I think what you're getting at is like, what are we losing? What are we losing as a society? Well, when these things were fixed before, right, as society evolves, as we evolve, this kind of goes back, and I'm going to bring up something like way out of left field, but we were talking about like gender in in a meeting like some weeks back, and there's the idea of as people evolve, right, and we validate and we understand certain things like new knowledge, right, scientists come up with new knowledge, right, medicine and the medical community comes up with new knowledge in artistic creation. And, you know, as society progresses, we come up with new things. But if we keep using the same language that anchors us back to times past when things were more fixed or things were like less evolved, then we lose out on some of like the things, the external things in the world that can come in and shape things in a new way. It really hinders our growth. So I understand like there is a huge, you know, it's a very important that we have clear language so that we can have discourse and we can talk about things and we can problem solve and we can make society work for us and work together. But it is also, I think it also behooves us to understand that there are different ways of knowing things, and is validation to putting like the art piece, right? Someone who's going to fork over like a bunch of money for it, they understand it moves them in a certain way that they may not be able to verbally express to somebody else because it is an embodied feeling, right? So I don't know. Those are just some thoughts, but thank you for letting me finish my thought.
Yeah, thank you, Megan, and for coming back to your sort of cut off previously. No, I think you make a very valid point, and I think that's you're getting close to what I'm about, and I would presume that you would have liked that Finnish teacher example if the sound came through, and I do apologise if the sound didn't, and it was probably picked up by the microphone of my thing. But the point about there is that the teacher was teaching happiness. And it was bringing out that very important distinction that I felt at school. Look, things have moved on when I was at school, but I remember learning geometry. And it was taught by an English teacher, and I say that because to pass geometry, I had to repeat the whole theorem, and you lost points, half a point, as I recollect, for every full stop or comma that was left out of the theorem. Now that's an extreme example, whereas the Finns in today's world would say, well, you can learn your trigonometry geometry by going home and working out a way that you can work out the height of a tree. Go home and see if you can work out your own way of working out the height of a tree, which would bring it back, work out how long the shadow is at a particular time of day and what the angle of the sun is, and then a bit of trigonometry, you can work out the height of the sun. Now that's applied, and that is I would suggest is the theme of the maths teacher. You feel very happy to come back the next day and report to your class, hey, I worked it out this way, and somebody else said, yeah, but I did it this way. You own it, and it becomes part of your beingness. It's very motivating. That's what chemistry was for me. I could make explosives. My middle name was Din. Huh? I used to make dins everywhere. Chemistry was something, bang! It was wonderful. It was my passion. Then I went to uni and I learned to describe. It was no longer, it was just stuff in my head. Anyway, Megan, I don't know whether I answered your contribution there, but gave me an opening to share a little bit of my background and my enthusiasm for what I was presenting today. Did I cover your point? Was there anything outstanding, Megan? Yes, you're on silent. Oh, well. Okay. Thank you, Megan.
She might have disappeared again.
Oh, she's there still.
Oh, right. Okay. See if we can find. Yes. Yeah, Megan, you can unmute yourself.
Oh, thank you. So sorry, I was stuck there. Yeah. No, I just wanted to kind of clear it up and connect it with like my experience, and I just kind of wanted to share a different viewpoint because the way that my brain works is a lot less like verbal and a lot more of like the embodied, like the first person, right? And that's how like I do art and things like that. And so trying to verbalize that to people, it's a bit difficult sometimes when people like different silos of science and all the different types of learning, and it's hard to describe how like it all comes together, right? Like you can derive math, or you can derive physics, or you can derive biology, you can derive all of these things and you can extract them from your lived experience. And I think that that's really important. It's important to extol the passions of learning that and learning to love your passions and embodying that to children. So I agree. So thank you.
Yeah. Thank you, Megan. I think you addressed it. And I think the important point, as I interpret it, is that, you assemble your first person experience in your way, and it's your way, and it's perfectly valid. And, you will tune it up. It is if I can say, your private language game, if you like, or it's probably, Ludwig, you probably won't agree with me there. Anyway, you've created your mechanism for connecting with the world, and then you have to communicate it. You're creating a record, and that is then transferred. and that is that then becomes the third person communication from yourself, however that was assembled. Yeah, well, thank you.
George, your turn.
Thank you. So Remco, I'm curious because I'll admit again, and I didn't hear the whole thing, but so you're arguing that there is a first person point of view, and from a scientific perspective, you know, in other words, one person's interpretation or view of the world, no matter how erudite, right, is not going to capture the whole world, right? So indeed, going back to physics and in physics, this is a religious view of physics that I'm going to articulate in a moment, is that physics is the only science, physics is the only rational way to study the world in terms of matter and energy being driven by the laws of physics, and that's the point. That's the first person point of view argument, right? Or the idea that God, right? You can understand God in a totality of a sense of a totality through the Bible, right? I mean, these are fictions, right? The point is that we need multiple third persons in order to try to gain at least a coherent understanding of the ontology of reality, right? The process that is reality. And so maybe you could clear that for me. I mean, again, I'm so sorry I missed your talk for the most part, but maybe you could sum up your view of the first person, because if you seem to you go back and forth in my mind listening to you, but you seem to believe that there is something called the first person point of view that is a totalizing perspective.
That is a what perspective? Totalizing?
Yes.
The first person is a totalizing?
In other words, the idea that I guess in the end, what I'm going to say to you is, what's the value you're pushing first person? It seems like is a normative good, and so again, because I'm reading into that, the idea again of the physicist that says we can have a total view of reality, a totalizing view of reality, right, from the vantage point of this formula, right? And so I'm wondering, because that's what I'm reading into what you're arguing when you seem to be touting the first person, but then sometimes you back away from that. So I'm not really yeah, to me, just listening to you now, it's not a very clear cut argument. So maybe you could rephrase it for me, just quickly, in a sort of few words, if possible.
Look, I think the essence is, again, like what Steve Parker was doing a few weeks ago is what are you dealing with? Are you dealing with a map or are you dealing with reality? I think for the majority, and my experience at university was that I was dealing with the map. I was dealing with, descriptions. I was not dealing with the how. The how is missing. To a large extent, you can articulate it, and I think if and I think I was totally marinated into this descriptive world. It was the dominant way that I've been through the various faculties at university. Or I shouldn't dwell on university; it's not the point. But it was all about the description and not about the how. And if you can get that distinction, then a lot of this discussion just fades away. I'm entitled to my first person view, and my first person view will be enhanced through the experience of moving through this world. It will be the records that are made by others will affect my first person view. But there's still always, or without exception, there is always a residual which we call the first person. And even Einstein implicitly made that distinction. He put us in frames of reference, which is a cute way of avoiding the first person, but it really is what it is. If you can get that. If you can,
let me understand this. So let me understand this. So if I could, I think I understand better what you're arguing. Firstly, I'm going to push back a little bit and say description. I think what you're getting at is you can describe, and you're describing how this chemical affects another chemical. You're not really getting at the why. Why are you studying this? Why is this important? So in the end, I think your first person, as you're describing, is more of like a personal poetry. It's more like it is a kind of focus on the ego, right? It's like how is this valuable to me? How is this important to me? And so you really are, I mean, you are abandoning. So it's not really a broader claim about the nature of reality per se, as much as how do I connect with reality? So it's a very, again, a very ego-driven, it's a very an ego-centered analysis. And again, and that's fine, but it's more about you want to live life as a poetry. You want to experience life as a poetry and not as a physics.
No, I have to come back and say again, um, I have here in my hand a book, and it's a record. This happens to be Nexus by Harari. It's a record. It's his interpretation. It's strictly third person. I then read it. I then absorb it. I interpret it, and I will, my view of the world will likely to be shifted. But that is a first person at that point, and that's all you need to say. But what I'm concerned about, and is that people don't recognize that distinction. It's the failure to recognize the distinction and to have not recognized the legacy of the ancient Greek thinking is still around without the cost of that being fully acknowledged. That's all I can say. I sound like a stuck record, George, but that's all I
Well,
can say.
I'm wondering if you're pushing like an individualism. Is that what this is? Is this where you're driving at?
I'll say it again, George. Would you please repeat that?
I'm wondering, okay, so first and foremost, I'm not exactly sure what your critique of the third person is, but are you pushing like an individual, like a sense of individualism? Is that what you're sort of driving at?
No, it's the distinction, George, between a record and the interpretation. You've got to make that distinction. In as much as there is a distinction between first and third, it's also being clear what you're dealing with. If you're dealing with that is a record, and there is an interpretation that I will make, and that interpretation sits with me. I am then sitting with an interpretation which is strictly first person, and then if I communicate that via a record, then I am transferring information, but without context, just like a map. And that's where that discussion with Steve was a few weeks ago was so important. I think the vast majority of people confuse the map for the territory, as blunt as that. There is a distinction between, it's why I held for decades without asking that very simple, silly question: what the hell is energy? I've been talking about thermal energy and kinetic and potential and the various guises, without actually asking, well, what is actually energy? And the only thing I can come up with some mysterious causal agent. And that's all I can say, but I never asked the question because I got hijacked by the label. And that's what happens. Academics are particularly strong on that. They're very, very good at description. They're very poor in being able to describe the nature, and particularly in economics. I could sound extremely erudite by talking about cross-elasticities of demand and multipliers and externalities. Wonderful. I probably got some jobs from that. But was it actually useful to me? No. I was describing. We're probably talking past each other, George. I could say, yeah, that's all I can say, George.
Thanks. Stephen, your turn.
Yeah, well, I was sort of pointing out before that you seem to be talking about something which is just in normal growth. We start off seeing ourselves as an I. And we're off in our little dream world, thinking we're an I. Then suddenly the teacher comes out and says, "You laddie," like in what was it? That movie where the teacher has got all the school kids. Is this famous Pink Floyd? Yeah, Pink Floyd. And he has that picture of the teacher with his cane. The students there writing poetry in the class when he should be studying, and the teacher comes along and he sees what's going on. He picks it up, reads it out, and laughs at the child. Absolute rubbish, laddie. This is what we need, a more Yorkshire view of the world. And I think you were there, Remco, and I was there too. You know, we're off in our dreamland meditating upon our navel, and then the teacher comes along and says, "You laddie, you." And of course, the ultimate progress is to get to the third person when we suddenly join all the dots and we objectivize everything and we see, oh, yeah, there's me sitting in the classroom. I've got the teacher about ready to cane me. How do I deal with all that? And what I want to ask you, Remco, is why the world should deal with your subjectivity or the subjectivity of anybody, because as far as I can see, the larger society in practical concerns can only really deal with third person. I can't see beyond a sphere of art the first person being addressed. Do you think there is something you can teach us there, or something you can show us? Thank you.
I got to be blunt. I'm not sure that you understand what the idea of a third person is. I get, sorry, the first person. I'm hearing third person conversations. Basically, if you were talking first person, you would be saying what your experience is at that time when you're having a relationship with the teacher, and it's at that point you're dealing with something. It's all I'm encouraging is that there is something that I'm dealing with here. It's asking yourself that hard question. So, for example, I'm trying to put it in a way that it might land with you. If you say, for example, this is simply a lefty, a socialist, left wing, right wing. If you make that point, what are you actually communicating? You're communicating something about your perception of where you are relative to something that is a construct out there. And I know that I'm actually trying to tailor the conversation to a conversation that you and I had some time back. But if you really ask yourself, what am I really saying? You actually you'll have a different conversation. You can get away with it. You can talk about the lefties. You can talk about the whatever you like and use that as your reference point. It's very common in the dialogue in North America at the moment, and we're seeing extremes of that. Where you get the socialist left being sort of seen as a fulcrum point. It becomes a pivotal point in the conversation without ever anybody asking, well, what does that actually mean? For me, it's meaningless. It's just a label. It's just a label that you make a conversation around, and it's absolutely, totally meaningless. If you were to
No, it isn't meaningless, Remco.
Yes.
Because lefties believe the government should bankrupt themselves paying welfare. That's going to kill us all.
That is your perception, and I think that I have to leave it at that because I don't want to. Otherwise, we're going off on a tangent.
Reality, Remco, reality.
Steve, we're going to have to take it from you. You've made the point, but I would say the important bit to take is ask yourself some hard questions. And you will see that some of the points that are being made are actually third person that hasn't been properly digested and hasn't been fully absorbed and becoming, as Megan so nicely put, it hasn't been embodied yet. All you're doing is and there is a communication. That's why I've been a defender, for example, of conspiracy theories. Because there was another conversation going on, and in an earlier presentation that I did, I think it was a couple of years ago, where I could be construed to be defending Trump. And this is not a political discussion. Let me quickly jump in there. But the point is, behind this 34,000 lies that the Washington Post recorded in his first term of office, there was a valid communication going on. But the more cognitive amongst us were blocked to it. And I'm saying there was a valid conversation that resonated with some people, and that conversation is not apparent to the more cognitive, that is, to the third person. Those that are particularly academically inclined will see that through the radical, 34th lie, this is a lie, there's still a valid conversation. This is the first person at work, I'm suggesting. The first person will see past it and feel engaged by that, and that is the important part. So not to take sides, please don't misconstrue what I'm saying. It's about taking it and embodying it, as Megan well articulated. So thank you, Steve.
Tony, go ahead.
Thanks, guys. Remco, thank you very much for the talk. I appreciate that. So the first thing I would say is that subjective experience is obviously very, very difficult to deal with. I'm not even sure there's anything that we can say about it definitive now or even ever. So for the time being, I'd rather focus on biology and try to see if we can think about how might we make a first person, third person distinction that's actually grounded in biology. So the first thing we might think about is the origin of a biological unit, right? A self as differentiated from its environment. So in that case, we're talking about metabolism, and this has been the thought of many thinkers, Bertalanffy, Hans Jonas, Maturana and Varela, when they talked about autopoiesis, many people focused on metabolism as the origin of that. But then this is the interesting part. Well, that's interesting. But then we go to adaptivity. And so in order to have adaptivity, you need regulation above that metabolism. And the interesting thing there is it seems you can start making at least some movement towards sense making and towards this idea of a first person versus a third person perspective. Keep in mind, grounded completely in biology for the simple fact that it's not enough to conserve the ability to self-construct, but you need to be able to monitor the gradient. How close are you to the boundary of viability? In other words, if the only time you find out you're not viable is once you're already dead, then you're not going to be able to do anything with that information. So it's only once you have the ability to sense the gradient, how far are you away from the boundary of viability? And then also, how quickly are you approaching that boundary and what adjustments can be made? Then I believe you can start to say in a very grounded way, that particular system has a perspective, right? Now, again, here I'm not talking about subjective experience, but I'm talking about subjectivity relative to how it interacts with the environment. There are actions it can take that will benefit it remaining viable versus actions that will not. And then finally, this idea of extending that regulation into the environment as agency. Now there are actions it can take in the environment that improve its viability versus actions it can take that will not. And so I just thought I would throw that out there. Also, for those who are interested, two resources that I posted in the chat. The first one, An Evolutionary Story of Agency. Check that out. The next one, Principles of Minimal Cognition. That one is strictly focused on chemotaxis and cognitions. I recommend both of them. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for your question, Tony. Tone, isn't it, Tone? Sorry, Tone. Yeah, no, I think I would first of all say to you that most of what you said was very much third person. And if you talk about what is life, you can define it, and as you must. You can identify, the attributes and characteristics of what life is. But I can't describe what life is. I'm not sure. It's just a word that the biologist will use. But it is not a term that applies to me because my first person perspective, just like consciousness, just like free will, don't exist. You see, and that's the distinction I make. So it's perfectly valid to talk as you did, but make that distinction, be aware of it. And that can be very life-changing. And that's why I put the effort into making this presentation was, because I'm quite passionately committed to developing that awareness that you can't move through this world without affecting it. You're an integral member of this world, and whatever you do, it's whatever what you experience is also affecting the other, and so it is also seemingly with the double slit experiment in quantum mechanics. If you try to measure it, measure the consequence. Now I'm created just a little hole for myself here because somebody's going to jump on me here. But the process of measurement appears or can be interpreted as having the affecting the outcome, and in a sense that's true. But it only so that's an interpretation that you I can only make after you made the record, because once you have the record, you have a system that is created, and you have a certain outcome from that system. So you've gone from the first person as the creator of that quantum system. You get an outcome, which is either particles or you're getting waves, but you're making that after the assessment, and that's a growing acceptance with people like John Wheeler. Look, I'm going off to tangent, but I just wanted to make that point. John Wheeler, Carlo Rovelli, and other scientists whose name just slipped me are gradually accepting. So make that distinction. Tony, I don't know whether I answered you. If there's anything, you come back. Otherwise, thank you.
Did you want to respond, Tone?
Okay.
No, apparently not. Sonny, it's your turn.
I was sorry. I was trying to unmute. I could not unmute. The first thing I want to say is I understand what you're saying about the double slit experiment, but that's sort of different what I was saying about biology. And I try to be very clear in saying that subjective experience could be important. I just don't think there's much that can be said about it right now that's intelligible, other than to say one person has one view of it, another person has another. I mean, you could take Spinoza and Russell's view. You could take a view that it comes from computation. You could take many different views. So I don't know how to differentiate between them. So what I was actually trying to do is take what you were saying and phrase it in such a way that we can ground it in biology. I don't know if that point came across. It wasn't about quantum mechanics. It was about biology.
Yeah. But it's you used the word subjective. I don't have a need for the term subjective. It's not. It's a term that academics will employ. What they're really saying is, what the first person experiences, and I'm going to call that subjective because I'm in the world of objectivity, and that has a lot of respect. Objectivity has a lot of respect, but objectivity is not objective, because it requires some coordinates. It requires stabilization in the context, and that is what most of those that are holding the term objective oversight. That
when you talk about first person, are you talking about norms? Are you talking about normativity that an individual has relative to everything outside of them? Is that what you're getting at with the first person view?
No, I don't talk. I don't want to talk about it. I'm using the fact that you're having an experience, and other people. How can I put it? It's my experience versus what is recorded out there and is called objectivity. It's why I had that graphic there with people sitting around the center, and they were contributing to something that was objective on the table, and that is what is recorded, and that is what is called objective. But you have to remember that that is a product of a concordance of various inputs in a particular situation, and it has a relevance. It's socialized information, but the context.
How do you situate this in biology in your mind? Like how do you situate these concepts in biology?
How do I situate it in the field of biology? Well, it's like your description of life. I'm saying that you can measure, and then there's a lot of debate what life is. I mean, that is a fundamental benchmark in biology, correct?
Sure.
Yeah. Okay. But it's an extreme example, let me say. But I don't know what life is, nor can I describe it. Just like I can't describe consciousness, I can't describe what free will is. These are terms that can only be described by another person. I can read it, I can debate it, but that is the distinction, that I do not experience what life is, nor can I describe it.
I'll leave it there for now. Thank you.
Sonny, go ahead.
Thank you. Remco, you're standing still with so many questions. I really appreciate what you brought. It kind of resonated with me a lot. When you said the first person experienced the third person more a record, a biographical information. I just it kind of limits how much you can capture of an experience also. And so literature is elevated to be a high place in terms of record, and yet when we read it, it's not the same as experiencing it. Like the Gettysburg Address, you can read it, but when you talk to a person who was there watching the address, hearing, that's a total different experience. And so, that what do you call the feedback loop in terms of reading the record and also experiencing the information, what has been recorded, is a total different thing. Just reading it doesn't mean that you're experiencing so this kind of compares between the university driven education and apprenticeship. Being an apprentice is a much more richer way of learning. We live in a left brain world, a lot, what Ian McGilchrist talks about. And so that's the problem. When we are encountering people, it's all about measurements. What you can't measure does not exist. That's not true. There's a lot of things which are missed and lost. My whole thing question is, there's so much we know, but which we can't tell. What they call the tacit knowledge. So what you presented really was so helpful. Thank you so much.
Sonny, and thank you. I sincerely thank you for that clarification. I'm not because that you're siding with me, but you articulated it very clearly. And I think the important part is, let's say if you had, and I had a slide to that effect, and whether you saw it or not, is where you have a speaker and they're making a speech. And you may have a transcription service and you have a record of that speech. And that is what would be seen as being objective. But to remember, that is a record. And it's a record that misses the nuances. It might leave some ambiguity about some of the words. You might have missed some of the body language. That somebody in the audience who's listening in may get a very different interpretation of some of the words than you as a reader reading a transcript of that in the newspaper, because you weren't there. You're missing out on some of the communication. And that is a distinction between, and I'm not saying that even sitting in the audience, you may not fully get what the speaker was saying, but you're certainly going to be a little bit closer to get into the mind of the speaker. And so that's an important distinction between the objective and the subjective, or and what some people use, or first person and third person. So the transcript now has a life of its own, and in time it will be read again, but in a different era, and it will have a different interpretation. And that is the point of that first person, third person divide. The third person has absolutely no doubt. The third person says, well, that was a record of that speech made 10 years earlier. But you're reading it through the mind of a culture that has moved on 10 years. So just like a movie, I mean, how many of you have watched an old movie from say, 50 years ago, even perhaps longer, 50 years ago, and listened to the conversation and say, oh, weren't they bad actors? Weren't they clunky? Weren't they awkward in their communication? Well, how about if that was because our culture has moved on? We have a different language game, or different ways of communicating. It's not about the acting, it's about us, you see. And so that's really is the point I'm trying to make, and it's to be open to it. Look, I think, it's all I'm trying to do is not to deal with something and is something tangible. I'm talking about having that capacity to make a distinction between the first and third person. And so I did it from different angles, including that graph on GDP, for example, per capita and national. That is a distinction in a form. It's actually a subset. It's not strictly correct, but I was trying to take you into the direction of what it is for experience as distinct from the systems view, and that's why I took that one, even though it is fundamentally a little bit wrong because you're dealing with something that's you can't actually finger exactly. I'm taking you in that direction. Sandy, thank you, mate. Thank you. Was there anything I missed, by the way?
Nope, you're great. Thank you.
That's awesome. Well done.
Phil, it's your turn. Unmute yourself. Go ahead.
Yes, it was it comes. Thanks, Derek. Remco, I've only come in for about the last hour and a half, I guess. And I know this New Zealand time started at 4, so it's obviously a really really good topic. I struggle with these kinds of concepts, but that's just the way my mind works. And I can see what you're meaning by first person, and I have my own interpretation. But I'm looking forward to having a look at your book, and maybe you've got some other articles out that I can have a look at. But I know with first person, just in grammar, it's I felt this, I did that, and we hunt around when there's something historical has happened, and you look for those first person accounts. They're often very different, and then we have somebody saying, I can see you felt this, Phil, and you're thinking, well, how can you be in my mind? That's an assertion. And then we talk about whole groups. We look at an audience and we say, oh, the lefties, we categorize them, we say they decided to do this, but there'll be a whole mixture of thoughts and nuances in the discussion. And I'm also thinking I became interested in Robert Keegan's levels of mental development, and I'm not meaning that necessarily the levels are morally correct or anything like that, but at a childhood level, we sort of impulsively do things, and we respond. We have lots of big emotions. A 2-year-old and 3-year-old, you see that, and then we sort of move up. We learn the rules, and we sort of become socialized. And I think these third person narratives, they become the book. The bureaucracy has said this is the way we do things, and then it gets a little bit more dangerous. Some people start making their own rules, and then you become self-transforming. Those people can get a bit dangerous because they start questioning everything, and I think those differences, the different ways of thinking, I think that's been one of the challenges of getting your concepts across, that people are speaking across categories. I think there's a lot of talking that's going past of what you're trying to communicate. But I just wanted to add my bit that I think this is a really challenging topic. The third person concepts of the official record, or what each group thinks, we need to realize that it's that too is subjective, and it'll be different from the individuals. Thank you very much for taking the time for preparing the presentation.
Yeah, thank you, Phil, and thank you for your question. And I just would add, as I say, it's about the awareness. Even if you, it takes some time to allow that to sort of percolate into your being, into to make and to see why I'm quite passionate about making that distinction. And you can make it in other ways. You can make a neurological distinction too, by the way, just a little on the side. You know, there's the McGilchrist line, and he might use the left-right brain, but more comfortable is saying, look, you know, it's your extent, it's the extent of your focus, and sorry, I should have put it on silent. My apologies. Go away. Thank you. It's making that distinction between how you focus and they, you know, if you're familiar with McGilchrist, is you focus widely, which is you know, taking a holistic picture, which is the McGilchrist line, which is getting close to the sensory. You know, the phenomenologist of phenomenology of Husserl, or whether you take an out of context and look at the fine detail and make a discussion about that, and it's something that politicians are particularly skilled at as well. So that is a sort of a complement or alternative to neurological discussion you can have in lieu of the first and third person, and you see that they're both roughly corresponding. In other words, you could say that the left brain corresponds to the third person, and the right brain, the holistic, the master, if you may, is the first person. So it's all about the same, you know, the same argument, perfectly sensible. But by crikey, you know, it's hard. It takes time to get that message through, and particularly if you've been marinated in the engineering world as I've been, it's very hard to shake off. But look, Phil, that was a long answer. I don't know whether I answered you directly. I took the opening to just promote McGilchrist. But thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, I enjoyed reading McGilchrist and an earlier book, but the Bicameral Mind. I'm trying to remember the name of the author, but it was same kind of concepts. And I think society is challenged by the individuals working at, you know, we all try and communicate and work together, but we're all working at different levels, coming from different perspectives. There's the dancers saying that they'll see my new dance and it explains what's going on in society, and you've got to get into that mindset, or the artist that draws 3 stripes on a wall and says, this is something which captures the kernel of the moment. Yeah,
indeed, and this is where Yuval Harari also, in a way, you know, I respect the man. He was a military historian, professor of military history, and he does it in his way. He hasn't. I don't know that he's aware of McGilchrist or, you know, some of the other reasoning, or system 1, system 2. But he used the word, and he says a country is a fiction. And coming from a military historian, you can see where he's coming from. You know, he's coming very much to the first person. He's talking about it without actually talking about it. So there's various guys. You read a lot of the books and you say, he's onto it, but he's not quite using the conversation that I feel comfortable about. But you're just saying it. I think we just got to, you know, be aware of the long, dark shadow that still hangs around after 2 millennia of the ancient Greek thinking. That's how we've been marinated, and it's very hard to shake it off. It's very hard to shake off, because it's, you know, you'll find yourself being fingered. This is woo. This is not useful. And I'm prepared to put my neck on, you know, the head on the block and say, well, I'm prepared to say it. It's the ancient Greek thinking that's standing in the way. It's a cost. There is a cost, and we've got to recognize the cost.
Well, Gilchrist was rebuked, and same the guy that did the Bicameral Mind, he was rebuked as well. You know, being going right back to the ancients and talking about the different hemispheres and what was God, and okay.
The neurological map saying that, and there is also the quantum mechanics and the foundations of science saying that, and then same applies in biology, the same applies in economics, the same applies in law. And that's why I went into some detail about the mushroom lady case. You can see that same thing there. And you can see that the court with their wigs and robes are preserving a particular way of looking at the world. Now that might work, but you also, let's have a bit of honesty. Let's recognize they don't trust the jury. It's the same thing. Anyway, thanks, Phil.
Thanks, Frank.
And Phil, you'll find a couple of Remco's previous lectures in our YouTube channel.
Okay, thanks very much, Derek.
Ariel, your turn.
Yes, I really enjoyed your presentation, Remco. Um, a couple of things that came to mind as you were giving your presentation. I just wanted to mention them and see if I've pretty much, I think I pretty much know the advantages and disadvantages of third and first person. Because I'm a gamer, I mean, there's a big monster, so you want to see all of it, so you zoom out, right? And everybody tries to kill the big blob. Well, if the blob turns into 100 tiny little blobs, um, you really got to get small quick. So I'll just put it there with that. And then the other thing that came to mind is when I was one of my first college classes um, was a career development class, and one of my projects was involved the military, and we were discussing, military service and things like that. Uh, it was suggested to me to interview a veteran, and I did interview a couple. And so it's one thing to read a history book about World War I and World War II. It's quite another to talk to a veteran about becoming a soldier and how they felt. And being told that from a soldier's perspective, when they went into World War II, they were very, very happy to serve their country. But when they got into it, they realized it was hell. And so, but still very patriotic, but just knowing that, you know, it's always a good idea after you read a history book, if you can find somebody who lived it, to talk to them, because they are part of that time capsule. And the problem with the Bible, I think, that a lot of people are going away from the Bible is that how do you relate to something that old, and the stories and the way they were written, and that they've been rewritten so many times is another thing. It's very hard for us to relate to the Bible, whether some of those stories are true or not, because of the way they're written and the fantastical way they're written. But, maybe if we talk to somebody, a shepherd in the field or something, who saw something miraculous one night, then maybe we'd really know the real story. So there's a couple other things that came to mind as well. The whole system idea. You have an employee who's complaining about harassment to security, and then getting their computer bombed. And instead of looking at what's happening, they're blaming the employee that's making their life hell by complaining about it. So there is this, I do get it that there can be, with the third person, a rather haughtiness of, who are you and why are you making my day miserable because you're complaining about something and it's all your fault, right? So yeah, that kind of, I used to have a wonderful view of security and security specialists on computers, but yeah, it's not a club that I really want to subscribe to anymore, because I don't think they help people. I think they help corporations and systems. I don't think they help people. I'll leave it there and just see what your comments are on that.
Well, thank you, Aaron. I'm having a little bit of difficulty sort of nailing it down so I can respond in a meaningful way. Um, I did feel, for example, and I'm treading into other more in David's domain. It's like being, if you're unaware of that first third person view, then you can get yourself into serious strife. And I think a lot of the things that are reported in the Bible were transcriptions that were made without regard to the first and third person. In other words, Paul, St. Paul, and I maybe stand corrected here, but I don't really want to make it a debate about that, but the principle is valid, that he made transcriptions as the first person, but was heard on the third person. And, we see evidence of that in the Gospels, where, the resurrection was interpreted as by the Gospel of Mary. That was part of the Hag Gospels that were found in Egypt, and reports the resurrection as a feeling, whereas it was interpreted and recorded in the Bible, partly by selective exclusion at the Council of Nicaea, as the physical resurrection, and that to me it could well be a transcription error without being aware of and exploring it directly. But what do you mean when you say that? And to hear it through a third person can lead to, what we have today. I don't know whether I'm making sense there, but that's basically what I'd like to say, is having that awareness and to being able to ask the questions in a way that might expose deeper meanings. And I might seem to be going off track, and I'll wind up with this. It's like the conspiracy theories. I've read endless debates by academics. They're missing the point that a conspiracy theory is still a valid communication. It's communicating something. But if you're very cognitively inclined, you will miss what the conversation is, because you will say, oh, but that's factually incorrect. What if that person actually is communicating a feeling, and that feeling is often about distrust? Anyway, sorry, I don't know whether I've answered you there, Ariel.
Yes. The one thing I did miss and that I wanted to mention is the law link. And the law link to me is very important because, okay, we're in this process now, like the recording. The recording is important. But I think with the Holocaust, it's very important that we interviewed those people before they died, right? We interview veterans before they die, and get the first person perspective from them, because there are people even today who deny the Holocaust even happened. And what is that, right? And so history changes depending on who you're talking to, and it's just like everything else, just like the news. What flavor do you want today, or what you want it twisted to the left or twisted to the right, or so I think it's important because it lends validity to an experience, to something that did happen, that a system might later come and say never happened.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. And a good example of this, and I thought he did a very good job, is Rutger Bregman's book, Humankind. And he describes various interpretations. For example, the Zimbardo or the Milgram experiments, the famous ones. And these were so-called laboratory experiments done at Princeton, and I think where they had white-coated individuals, and it showed how people can be readily seduced. But there was also another story that was evident, and so the public record was challenged by the author Bregman. To say that, well, actually, they were actually paid. And when there was fighting at the bitter end in Berlin, the German soldiers weren't fanatical, as the public record might say. No, he was saying that, look, these German soldiers fighting in the last days at Berlin, when the war was clearly lost, they weren't fighting as fanaticists. They were fighting to support their compatriots, their mates. They were supporting each other. And in that process, the interpretation is misconstrued. Anyway, a little bit more about first person. I'm not sure whether I answered you directly, but a lot of these things can only be answered in an indirect way. Thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you.
George, go ahead.
Okay. I think I finally understand, Remco. What I'm listening to here, and this is supportive in what I'm saying. Okay, I'm listening. I'm hearing existential angst, a kind of crisis. I'm sensing of a person that's looked at reality as solely made up of matter and energy. And after a lifetime of studying that, you find it completely lacking. And again, that's my read and my understanding of you in this presentation. So I feel it's a very personal presentation. Um, it is a kind of lashing out at this dogma that only matter and energy exist, and looking at the world vis-a-vis this dogma, which doesn't give us any real answers, and is also existentially bereft of real true meaning. So again, I'm listening to you, and I think that's what I'm reading into your presentation. I hope you don't take any offense at what I'm saying.
No, absolutely not. I can never be offended, actually. I'm one of those people that always says, you can never offend me. You can say, but look, if it's bullshit to you. That's your entitled view, and so be it. You know, I mean, I have to accept that. It's the reality. I mean, all I can, you know, I've shared something, you know, that has taken me some months to evolve, and it was a lot of the words took me. Some of my slides took 20, 20 revisions. One slide just for a few words. 20 revisions in an extreme case, because I had to make it, try and make it as universal as I possibly could, knowing that there's a heterogeneous audience. I wasn't dealing with physicists or with scientists or psychologists or economists. I had to sort of make it universal, and it was my best attempt. And to me, it makes it's a very liberating. But you know, if your identity is caught up with a particular point of view, you're not going to give it up easily. I'm not talking addressing you, George. I'm just making a sweeping generalization. If your identity is caught up with a particular view, if you're a materialist and you come over very confidently in with your particular view, however, I will always in any discussion. And anybody that comes over passionately and say, look, you know, that's nonsense. You know what you're saying. You're just an idealist or whatever other adjectives or labels you want to throw my direction. There's always a flaw in your point of view, and that flaw is a failure to recognize that the description follows the record, and if you get that is sort of like a Rosetta Stone. You know, Rosetta was a stone that was found by Champollion in Egypt to translate between the different languages, Greek and ancient Egyptian. So the point I'm trying to make is, if you get that the description follows the record, then you will start to understand where I'm coming from, and that's it. It's as simple and as important as that. And you will listen to you may become like me, that you will switch off the news because all you're hearing is third person, or if you like, translating it, all you're hearing is things out of context. You're hearing the noise, you're hearing the sparkle, you're not hearing the substance, you're not hearing the bigger picture, you're not allowing that there's some of these rat bags out there with their conspiracy theories are actually making a valid communication. And why is that? Then you have a different connection with the world. Anyway, George, that's all I can say. Thank you.
Well, can I respond? Can I say this, which is that, firstly, again, I think my read of it is you're pushing back against the dogma of scientism, right? Again, only matter and energy exist, the laws of physics.
George, can I just ask you again? Are you saying I'm pushing back?
I think you are pushing back against scientism. Yes, I think you're pushing back against it.
Against scientism.
Yes, I think you're pushing back against it.
Okay.
That's my read of it. And I think, and ultimately it's all very hollow in the final instance because, I think I'm going to argue this. What makes life worth living is a concept of justice, a concept of solidarity, the idea that, everyone matters. And so, yes, I mean, we could look at science and energy and technology and matter and say, okay, yeah, there's explanatory power here. And this is why, Einstein said something about love. I forget exactly what he said. He said that love is just as important as anything else, maybe more important. And so, in other words, our study of matter and energy has to be framed within a humanism, again, justice, incorporating the whole of the totality of humanity in our reasoning and thinking. And so that's simply what I'm going to say in terms of finding actual meaning in life. Thank you.
Yeah. All right. Well, you made your interpretation, George. You're entitled to it. Um, I see science as a valuable language. It provides a regime of, asking always the question, where's your evidence? It relies on continual challenge. It is premised on the Popperian view of, can it be falsified? Yeah, it's a valid language. So I'm definitely not pushing against science. Far from it. Science has its place. It's done remarkable things. It's produced incredible tools, and our well-being has just rocketed in recent times. It can only happen through science. Fine, but that is all third person. It's also, creating room for that first person. That when you go to the GP, it is not just a one-way transfer of information. If it's a good communication, it'll be three-way. It will a two-way. It will go both ways, and that's the important part. And to be able to communicate beyond the obvious, beyond the symptoms, and there are maybe other factors at work. And that's just having that openness without having that ritual of rigidity. That's all I'm saying. Rigidity of purely a scientist having a one-way communication with the world. Anyway, George, I may not have satisfactorily responded, but that's my view. Thank you.
Yes, thank you. Kerry, it's your turn.
Thank you very much. So, Remco, it seems like one of the problems that we have is that, at least when we're doing the scientific, paradigm, we're at least in the reductionist model, we're looking for the irreducible. And you can't describe that, right? Because that would mean you're breaking it down further, and you can't do that. So you can't make any kind of description other than just that fundamental. You can name it, right? But that name is just a signifier. It doesn't mean anything. It's a placeholder.
Yeah.
So I think people run into a problem with that, especially when they're confronted with things like, the farthest reaches of where we're at with physics, where somebody shows you a formula and then people are like, well, what does that mean? And it's like, that's it. Right? As soon as you start to try and attach things to it, and it changes and alters what the thing, the math is a representation too, right? But you can't just, if you just translate that language into a different language, you might gain some insight in terms of being able to play with it conceptually, but that's not the thing. That's our ability to work with the idea, but that's not the thing in itself. Anyway, there's that. The double slit, I'm going to call it a demonstration rather than an experiment. It just seems like basically it's an illustration of expanding relationship. I mean, that's what entanglement is, right? There's the idea of the detector at the slit, whether it's on or off. Well, the photographic film at the back is a detector too. And then the person that is observing the film or the result of the detector is a detector, right? And it's not that these things, I don't think it's like there's some magic in the observer that collapses this wave function as much as every nesting layer becomes entangled with the one prior.
Yeah.
Anyway.
Yeah. Yeah. And yeah, Bohr was very much not an ontologist, unlike Einstein. He was very strong on, look, and like Heisenberg, ask a question of the universe and you'll get an answer. And that basically is what an experiment is about. And you get an answer, and the answer is a record. And then the record then becomes subject to interpretation. But it comes afterwards, not the other way around. And if the other way around, you've got a problem, and you will create enigmas. And it's just making that distinction. Now, you know, it challenges my way of looking at the world, but you know, it's the only way, and that I can see that I feel comfortable with. And you know, I'm delighted that scientists are prepared to come out and talk woo. You know, particularly my champion is John Archibald Wheeler. You know, he was a professor of physics. He supervised more PhDs in physics than any other professor, but he was talking, you know, like he's talking about a participative universe that we are co-creating. And then you get into rather remarkable domain, you know, ways of looking at the world. You know, like that there was no Big Bang. You know, we talk about a Big Bang as happened 13.7 billion years ago. But there is another way, and I feel more increasingly comfortable. There was never a Big Bang. It is just a way we look, and you know, at people like Stephen Hawkins, said that as well. And you know, it's challenging, but you know,
Well,
yeah.
fundamental description of reality doesn't involve, you know, if space and time are just these emergent constructions.
Yes.
What does any description mean? I don't think we can relate to it, even if we can describe it in abstract terms. It's not something we can relate to.
Right.
You know, a world outside of space and time, what the hell is that?
Ooh, yeah, you're talking third person now. Be careful, but anyway, you know, yes.
Well,
Yeah.
I mean, you know, you can say what you're situated in, but this is one of the things about science that's interesting too, is not only it's not discrete. These things nest together, and the narrative gets more complex, right? And my friend Tone is famous for talking about underdetermination. This idea, well, you'll have this description where you can have multiple perspectives that give you a valid take on what you've got, right? This would be like, you know, you can say, oh, Copenhagen is one, many worlds is another. You can now, you know, you've got this quantum Darwinism. I kind of like that one. You know, is any one of them real? I don't know. Does that question even make sense? Probably not.
Yeah. Yeah. I think a lot of the debate will simply melt away once you start to recognize where you're standing, you know, and having that honesty to say, well, okay, this is a perspective from a place that is not fully described. In other words, recognizing that what you're doing is dealing with a record that hasn't and cannot have full context. And yeah, and yeah, that's really that's what I'm sorry, I'm starting to stumble a bit here.
Yeah. No, I mean, the final thing I'd say, a true third person representation would have to be the universe.
Yes. Perfect. You got it.
Right. Okay.
Thanks, Gary.
I quit again while I'm ahead. Thanks.
Yeah.
Stephen, your turn.
Remco. I was just going to say, you know, when I hear the little maxims on YouTube, they're saying the precise opposite to you. All the maxims, they'll sometimes describe themselves as stoic, and I don't know how true that is, but they'll persistently warn to obscure your first person. To open up your first person to the world is to be misunderstood and attacked. And this is maxim after maxim after maxim. I don't hear much stuff on YouTube putting your alternate perspective. But I even found myself saying the same thing to people. You know, some people I know will start moaning about their subjective problems on YouTube. And I said, don't do that. You can't do that in the broad public. You'll attract the wrong sort of attention. So I think, Remco, you're on this jihad against the third person. You're pushing back. You think you can push back with your individuality against the rest of the world. And I don't know if it's going to work. Thank you.
All I can say, Steve, I'm not into popularism. I'm not into numbers. Okay? I accept that, you know, people are marinated into a certain particular point of view and they forget their origins. That's what drives wars. That's why good people get caught up in the sentiment of the time. They forget the seeds and the nucleus, and so yeah, you're entitled to that. But I'm not into popularism, and I would then that's all I can add to it. Thank you, Steve.
Darlene, your turn. Darlene. Go ahead. You're unmuted. Go ahead.
Yeah, so the thing that, can you guys hear me? Can everybody hear me?
Yes, go ahead.
Okay. So the what I was gonna say is I had there's so many interesting things in the presentation. Yeah, Rothko is like one of the artists I love. So I remember having a several teachers actually, but like I had a English teacher, um, and I remember very 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 distinctly about how in the fall where there was that we had just had the time change, and I remember him as like walking sideways and being like, oh, we're always so tired in the morning, and all of a sudden we do the time change, and then all of a sudden there's light, and he like puts his hands out to the sides, and his eyes are like all of a sudden like waking up, and you know he looked like a bright sunshine to me, and he was like demonstrating that there was that there's more sunshine out, and so from I later I many years later I found out that that particular English teacher, his wife was the theater teacher, and both of them were in a lot of plays, and so he was actually a terrific actor, and he was the first English teacher that actually helped me understand English as a subject at all. Like before that, I just knew that English like was my language. And like I knew the concept of spelling, but I before that had never really understood, what a verb was or almost anything. And on this teacher, who was actually like an actor, um, um, I would say just naturally, in personality, um, he basically made English, the subject of English, fun. And he was like actually getting like a ton of people in the class to actually understand, and he was basically individualizing the lesson multiple times a day to each and every person. And I had never seen that before, and that was like the first time that and I would say that that was a teacher that was teaching happiness, and um the actually I actually understood, um he was teaching poetry and teaching us how to write poetry, and um and then I had multiple teachers. Miss Ewing, she was just so passionate about every single story. It was like there was so much significance with each character, and I just basically these teachers that are kind of like that reading rainbow guy, and he has like the visor on like Star Trek, the Next Generation. um there are just some people where where when they they're teaching happiness, um and so I just want to put out there that, you know, I'm probably the person I am today because I had so many good teachers. I think I just got really lucky. Like like Coach Foster was a science teacher, and I he 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 was actually like the tennis coach, and he was just teaching science because he like had to teach science, but he made science so fun. Um, and I remember my chemistry teacher, unfortunately, in that I had him for 2 years in high school, and I'm feeling really kind of bad I'm forgetting his name, but he like had a sign above the door um that um that was like, remember, wherever you go, there you are. You know, of the chemistry room. That's what we would see every time we were walking out of the room. And it was like really big letters. Um, and just, you know, there are just some people who aren't even teachers, but they're just people you meet every day where they're spreading happiness. You know, where, you know, we could be in a grocery store and there's just somebody that just says something incredibly cheerful. And and I just, when you're talking about like the first person experience, and it's like, yeah, that is what is affecting me the most, and uh how my brain chooses to process that information becomes my character. Anyway, so yeah. And there was one time when I this first person third person thing, I remember my mom was, my parents, they read all these different ADD books, and they were saying all these, my mom was saying all these symptoms to the doctor, and she was lying. She was saying things about me that were not even true. And I remember standing up on the bed that's in the doctor room, and I actually put my hands on my hips and I said, "Why are you both keep talking about me in third person when I'm right here in first person?" I was really frustrated. I believe I was 14 years old, and the only reason I understood what first person and third person was because of Mr. Corder and Miss Ewing. Anyway, I'm just gonna yeah, I really appreciated talk, and I love Rothko. So
Oh, thank you, Darlene. Yeah, I think, you know, it's a direction to talk about teaching happiness or using happiness. It's a direction, yes, and it's a very valuable one. And as I shared from my own personal background, it was a great motivator in my case in chemistry. It was not about the thing anymore. It was about the joy, and chemistry was just a vehicle for me to do it. But one also has to be a little bit cautious in not getting too carried away with, for example, the message from the Finnish maths teacher. I mean, that art teacher might have created happiness in appreciating that Rothko. But be careful that you don't get your own thoughts hijacked by you know, that hierarchical positioning that Rothko can represent. In other words, you're getting caught up with the common conversation that says, "Oh, but I had never. That is really great the way it's got those rectangles proportioned, and if it wasn't for that color, I wouldn't have that feeling." You get caught up in the narrative without standing back for a moment and saying, "Well, what actually is it?" And that's why, I'm just trying to remember the name of the philosopher who made a whole thesis of that. It's about hierarchical positioning, both on the side of the artist in engaging us, and then being exploited and made into a record by the institutions, the art institutions, who then value that those two rectangles at $100 million. It's, you know, and then of course that in itself then creates an opportunity for somebody else to express their hierarchy, not in the appreciation of the art, but in their positioning as a wealthy person. And also implicitly in that, oh, yeah, I can see it. I'm there with it. And that's a little bit of a problem with using a term and then running too far with it. In other words, the idea of happiness, it has to be looked at ruthlessly and to make, to bring it back to the individual. And that's why I look at that. I wouldn't pay $100 for a Rothko unless I could had the opportunity for selling it. But maybe I'm exposing something about myself. Anyway,
I did some paintings in a class where we were focusing on color, and we were making these really large. We used a paper because we're students, and we used squeegees and like house paint that you use for painting your house. We were allowed to go just pick out the colors we wanted, and I made some Rothkos with some squeegees, and mine were like teal, purple, and gray, and like the background is gray, and it's kind of ironic because if you look at the picture behind me, it's basically green, purple, and green.
Yeah.
A little bit. I was trying to go for blue, but yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, thank you. Look, seeing that you're the last person, I'll just come back with a little bit of an example. I have a friend in India. He's a professor. And when he came and visited me in Perth, I said, look, I'll take you to some of the best vineyards in the Margaret River region. And I took him down there. We went to the best, and we went to a wine tasting, and it was just the two of us. And the lady behind the counter was sampling the wine, starting with the cheapest and building it up. And, and she was going to stop. And then I dropped that he was a professor and from India. Oh, she said, oh, look, I tell you what. She looked around. She said, I'm not supposed to do this, but I'm going to give you an opportunity to taste the very best, most expensive wine in the vineyard. And it was I think it was a $200 bottle of wine, actually. And she poured him a sample, and my friend Professor Barth picked up the glass and kept, and he said, and I wish I would have captured this on film. I wish I captured it. And he said, well, actually, I actually preferred the first wine. In other words, the cheapest. And I always remember it was some years ago, and I thought, yeah, he's not being hijacked by the price. He's honest. That was his experience, and it was perfectly valid.
Your darling want to respond? Or?
Yeah. That is a good example of somebody uh, being true to their first person self instead of being hijacked. That's true. Thank you.
Well, we're going to finish up in about 15 minutes. So who else would like to ask a question or make a comment? I noticed the chat has been full of off-topic comments, as is usually the case, but not all of them were. So perhaps we should have a look at them and see if Remco wants to respond.
Yeah, David, I'm just actually copying all the commentary and I've just got it on a page here. I'm going to save and I'm going to read it and I think I've been talking for 4 hours nearly. David, I might decline that offer. Unless somebody here has a particular question, I'm going to look at it and see if there's anything that comes out, and perhaps I'll put a comment on the page if I might, if anything sort of jumps out at me.
Yes, I might remind people that it is possible to record the chat. In the top right-hand corner of the chat window, there's 3 little dots, which you get a drop box, and it says record.
Save chat, yes. Oh, good one. Chat saved. And then show in folder. Okay. I wonder where it will. Oh, yes. Good. Okay, well, I've been copying and pasting, but that's a better way to do it. Yeah, thanks for that heads up, David.
Yes, you'll now have all their comments to blackmail them with. Because some of the comments could be used for blackmail. But I noticed Ariel had her hand up a moment ago, but there's Rick.
Yeah, Rick's there.
Go ahead, Rick. And then we've got to
Oh,
let Remco go shortly.
yeah, sure. I mean, you can, I mean, always, there's the possibility of, just as a matter of a housekeeping, there's always a matter of like if the, I mean, there's a lot of pressure on the presenter. So there's always a possibility for David or somebody else to field the questions and then see if the presenter wants to have a word on that topic or not.
Yeah, well, that's true. Yes. We can always have a look at the chat to see if the presenter wants to respond to any of them.
Yeah. I really enjoyed the conversation today, Remco. Thank you for presenting it. It's sort of similar to one of the projects I've been working on as well. I've been looking at different dichotomies in politics, like different concepts of freedom, different concepts of truth. So different concepts of freedom would be Aristotle versus John Stuart Mill. Different concepts, different conceptions of. So you got all these dualities in, let's loosely speaking, society. And I've been sort of collecting all of these different dualities slash dichotomies, and you get, pretty much a lot of these things are repeated. They come up all the time, and I think you did very well to find a dichotomy that actually came out at least in three cases in history between very famous thinkers. So I think that's very valid. So yeah, so I'm sort of trying to collect the list of different dichotomies and dualities, ranging from Aristotle and Plato. One's an abstractionist and one's an experientialist, which sort of also lends itself to what Remco was discussing. But there's a whole list of them, and Machiavelli talking about Asia versus Europe, um, and different political models and stuff. So yeah, there's a whole list of them, and the more you delve into this stuff, the more you realize the subtlety, and the more you realize. So at first you think that all of these dualities there can be sort of like a grand unified theory of dualities, but the more and sometimes you can sort of make an approach to that sort of idea at some level, but at some point that symmetry breaks, sort of similar to the symmetry breaking in the fields of the forces of the universe, sort of thing. You talk about symmetry breaking in in gravity and in the strong force, the weak force, and electromagnetism. So you sort of see these. This is what Murray Gell-Mann says in his TED talk. He says one of the reasons the universe is beautiful because it's the same on multiple levels and in multiple places. So yeah, it's a fascinating idea. I just thought I'd thank Remco today for his talk and David for putting it on, of course, as usual.
Yeah, well,
Yes, we've had some interesting discussions in the background. Go on, sorry.
well, thank you. Yes, and perhaps if Remco can stay, just let Ariel have her say.
Yeah, can I just respond just briefly to that last comment?
Sure.
Careful about the talking about the dualities. I mean, the dualities might be simply a consequence of the your perspective that you've assumed, and from that perspective, you generally that third person, and that's often a view from nowhere, which then creates that duality. But if you're prepared to step back and assume a first person perspective and you drill right down, you start to see that duality is just a consequence of where you're standing. And it might sound like double speak, but I find that whenever, and particularly those that are very confident, they talk very clearly. They talk with conviction and directness. But what you always find that there's always a weak spot in their line. There is something that they haven't addressed, and I think that they don't want to face that. I don't know when I'm making sense on that. You see the same on Einstein and Bohr. Bohr tended to sort of be convoluted. He was always, a bit more inclined to be, to be tedious, precise, but very tedious. Whereas Einstein was very succinct and very, but in the end, as we saw in that letter to Bessel, he started to, it took on to the edge of life before he was prepared to accept that maybe he was on a road to nowhere with his unified field theory. And I think it's an important point to make that a lot of these perceptions are third person, of duality and the like.
Ariel, go ahead.
Yeah, I was just gonna ask Remco if right now we have a tendency toward too much of the, in his opinion, towards science. I mean, it's obvious with education that that's where they're steering everybody toward the more scientific disciplines rather than the humanities. Certainly, that's where all the money is and everything. So even though that's the very industry that's going to be getting rid of jobs. So I guess my question is, the dichotomy I see with sort of a analytical scientific perspective is that it wants to further science, even at the sometimes it seems at the expense of humanity. And so I'm wondering if there's a need for more ethics, more human centric on the scientific side, and if that is a position he would hold, or at the same time looking at the first person and knowing that sometimes first person can be skewed, and not seeing reality in so but that's just the human condition. So some of us are not as as mentally acute or maybe able to see the true picture or willing to accept it. So I guess given that, I guess my view is that I don't think that really technology science and wherever it's going always considers the true impact that it's going to have on humanity. I think they always seem to try to rose color it, and it's not always that way. So I just wanted your position on that. If you think that there's a feel for more human centric, more ethical considerations in that direction.
Arlene, you've opened up a Pandora's box. It's a great, that is a Pandora's box. I mean, it's so complicated, and it's ethics. I mean, first of all, let's be clear. Science, in the language of science, we've produced miracles, and what were called mental asylums once been emptied thanks to science with all the psychotropics, and how can we deny that? And how our lives have been extended, all of that. But you often get into a situation where ethics comes into. Well, no, it's not worth ethics. It's where you are actually also in the process disempowering people. I mean, take I'm going down a little bit of a rabbit hole here, but for example, dealing with a person with ADHD or autism, and you give them medicines like Ritalin or the other medicaments to fix the person without dealing with possibly with the environment being wrong. Or what are you doing to that person to normalize them? I mean. Are you disempowering that person? Are you denying that person to live a better life rather than to use chemicals to modify their experience of the world? Yeah, I mean, it's an endless process, an endless. Look, I'm struggling, as you can see. Probably a little bit of mental fatigue is setting in here, but you know, it's yeah, you know how we use the DSM-5 as a legitimizer, as a Bible, and using that to categorize people rather than to leave the person alone or putting the person into a different environment, which was Michel Foucault's argument. You know, once upon a time we revered those that were on the spectrum, and now we try to normalize them with chemicals. Does that stack up on your argument of ethics? Yeah, good point. But yeah, look, it's a rabbit hole, and we're going a little bit off tangent. But it's a valid point to perhaps try and get into the other person's world more, rather than to try and drag them into your own world. In other words, using chemicals to take them and normalize them, because there's always a price to be paid. The theme of concentrated benefits and distributed costs to wealth, to your mental well-being. You don't take Ritalin about having a side effect that somewhere may not be directly visible, but there is an effect. Net benefit, questionable. Anyway, good points.
Well, thank you, Remco, for your presentation on reclaiming the first person. Yes. And you've lasted 4 hours in the hot seat.
I've enjoyed it. Got a lot out of it, David. You know, and yeah, it's been a wonderful experience. Thank you.
Okay, well, thank you again.